Seeing that flexibility from the EU is another day that consumers in Northern Ireland can't access products, that the Jewish community can't access, technically under the EU provisions, kosher food, that businesses can't get access to products they need, that over 200 Great Britain businesses are not supplying Northern Ireland. That affects the economy of both Northern Ireland and the wider UK, and we need to resolve that, and we need to do that as quickly as we possibly can.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Further to that answer, can I draw to the attention of the Secretary of State my constituent from Dromore, who is disabled and confined to a wheelchair. 3 weeks ago, the ramp on the back of her disability-adapted motor vehicle broke, and when she went to order the spare part from the supplier in England, she was told that they could not send that spare part to her because she was not registered with HMRC to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. This is precisely the kind of difficulty that the protocol is causing for ordinary people in Northern Ireland, and the idea that we just ignore it, sweep it under the carpet, forget about Article 16, ignores the rights of my constituents.
Secretary of State.
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. There are multiple examples out there, whether it is the Jewish community I just outlined, the individual case he had. We've all heard, I know he and I have both heard cases of other people unable to access products, goods, sometimes very, very important products for their lives, to be able to continue to live their lives in the way that any other citizen of the UK could. That isn't good enough. We also need to be very clear with the EU that their lack of flexibility at the moment is putting at risk the very thing that the protocol was there to protect, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. So it is right that we keep the pressure on. We will strain every sinew. I hope the EU will show that flexibility and pragmatism to resolve the issue they now recognise, which is the protocol isn't working, and I have to say it's just not sustainable in its current form.
Sir Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, households across all of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, are struggling because of rapidly increasing home heating costs. In Northern Ireland, we are subject to EU VAT rules. This means that if the Chancellor of the Exchequer sought to reduce VAT on home heating oil, he needs the permission of the European Union and all 27 member states to do such an action. Surely this cannot be right, that my constituents are being deprived of support they need from government because of the protocol.
Well, I'll say to the right honourable gentleman, obviously in February this year we put a further $250 million into the executive to support, to allow them the more flexibility on top of the underspend the executive's got to support people at a time where there are these pressures. But he is also quite right in highlighting just another one of the many areas where the protocol is creating real problems on the ground for people in their everyday lives. And we must remember the protocol itself says it will not disrupt the everyday lives of people in their communities. He's given yet another example where the protocol itself and the implementation of it is doing exactly that, and that has to stop.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself and my party with the remarks that the Secretary of State made at the outset about historical abuse victims and the forthcoming apology. Another important part of the Northern Ireland Protocol is Article 3, which says that the UK shall ensure that the common travel area and the rights and privileges associated therewith can continue to apply, in particular with respect to free movement to, from and within the island of Ireland for Union citizens and their family members, irrespective as to their nationality. Does the Secretary of State recognise the potential economic and political strain that introducing an electronic travel authorisation system could put on freedom of movement across the border? And what engagement does he plan to have with the Government of Northern Ireland, the Government of the Republic and their partners in the EU about how to make sure that such a set of frictions don't take effect?
Secretary of State.
Well, obviously, I'm sure he'll be aware that throughout the pandemic, we have made sure that we have kept the CTA itself, the Common Travel Area, flowing and open. That's not been the case from the Irish government necessarily at certain points, but we have done that. We think it is important. We will continue to do that. I will be talking to, and I'm looking to be talking to further, my officials have been talking with the Irish government about all of these issues this week and last week, and I will be continuing to do that myself as well.
We now come to John Long.
Two, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 2, 4 and 6 together. Mr. Speaker, next month marks 75 years since the young Princess Elizabeth made her famous pledge, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." Mr. Speaker, my department is working closely with colleagues across government and will play our full part in celebrating the achievement of Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee. Mr. Speaker, it will be the nation's opportunity to recognise all she has given to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, to express to her all she means to us, and to say to her with gratitude and in unity, long may she reign over us. God save the Queen.
John Lamont.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that response. I very much associate myself with his remarks. I know that the celebration of the Platinum Jubilee is going to be a cross-government effort, but can the Minister assure me that he's working with the devolved administrations too to ensure that this is an entire UK event where all parts of the United Kingdom are joining together to celebrate this momentous occasion?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. This is an occasion that should unite the whole of the United Kingdom, all regions and all nations of the United Kingdom. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I are working closely with local authorities and the government in Northern Ireland to make sure that this is something that brings communities together. Mr. Speaker, we will want to remember some of the 25 occasions the Queen has visited Northern Ireland, 3 of them as Princess Elizabeth and 22 of them as Queen. We want to involve young people, and we want to use the opportunity of the Jubilee to celebrate the best of Northern Ireland.
Debbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently was proud to join colleagues from across the House in setting up the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Could the Minister tell us what steps he is taking to ensure this celebration extends across the United Kingdom and that it is used to showcase the benefits of our UK, with Northern Ireland as an integral part of it?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. This occasion should bring us all together. And in that light, and specifically with reference to Northern Ireland, I would like to welcome the comments of the leader of Sinn Féin, who said that she wanted to extend to the British Queen a word of congratulations, because 70 years is quite some achievement. She said that's what you call a lifetime of service. Mr. Speaker, those comments have made it easier for us in Northern Ireland to celebrate this in all communities across the whole of Northern Ireland.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And the Platinum Jubilee presents a great opportunity to celebrate and reaffirm the place of all parts of our United Kingdom, especially Northern Ireland, which this year has celebrated its centenary year. Will my right honourable friend confirm that the celebrations will include UK-wide events, including in Northern Ireland, to celebrate all 70 years of Her Majesty's service, and will you also encourage all primary school-aged children in North West Durham to take part in my competition to design a Platinum Jubilee card for Her Majesty?
Minister.
The example that my honourable friend gives of the competition he's running in his own constituency, I'm sure will be replicated across the House. I can give my honourable friend the assurance that Northern Ireland will participate in all of the national events around the Jubilee, the Platinum pudding competition, the big Jubilee lunch. This is a great celebration for us all to enjoy, and is in a spirit of unity.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister was right to reflect on the comments from the leader of Sinn Féin. They are rare, and he will know that in Northern Ireland there still pervades a lack of generosity about the huge commitment and dignity that Her Majesty has shown our United Kingdom. He will also know that there's a stark contrast between the NIO's position on celebrating the centenary last year with the construction of a forum and the allocation of funds to a tame approach when it comes to the Platinum Jubilee. Can the Minister outline whether he will dedicate significant resource so we can celebrate this historic achievement in style?
Minister.
Well, look, firstly, Mr. Speaker, I don't totally agree with the characterisation of the honourable gentleman around the centenary programme that the Northern Ireland has run. I thought it was bold, I thought it was inclusive, and I thought it recognised the unique circumstances of Northern. Oh, you said you welcomed it? Sorry, I misheard you. So, Mr. Speaker, I apologise to the honourable gentleman. I'm so used to criticism from the party opposite that rare outbreak of consensus passed me by. I can give him my total assurance that we will be marking this Jubilee with full throttle joy and celebration, and my right honourable friend will be coming forward with some very innovative ideas of how we will mark it, especially in Northern Ireland.
Doesn't matter. Greg Smith.
Number 3, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 3 and 5 together. And may I say especially to my honourable friend from Buckingham, it's particularly good to see him in his place today. Mr. Speaker, I recently attended the Northern Ireland Day at the Dubai Expo, where I met many Northern Irish businesses already exporting globally, including White Oats, Hiverco and Greenfields. and we had the opportunity to meet with two sovereign wealth funds who I'm pleased to report to the House have accepted our invitation to come to Northern Ireland and look at the opportunities of investing in Northern Ireland as part of their programme of investing in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer. Thanks to our exit from the European Union, the United Kingdom is able to strike trade deals around the world without being constrained by the bureaucrats in Brussels. So can my right honourable friend assure me that he is working with his colleagues in the Department for International Trade to ensure that businesses in Northern Ireland who export their products are given full and due consideration in all trade deal negotiations?
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable friend. I can assure them that as a former Minister of State for Trade Policy, I bring that worldview to my role as Minister of State in Northern Ireland. The short answer to his question is yes. I'm delighted that we've now opened a new Department for International Trade hub in the heart of Belfast. I've met recently with the Economy Minister Gordon Lyons at the Northern Ireland Showcase. We've introduced the Economy Minister Gordon Lyons to the President of the Board of Trade before Christmas. We put £8 million into Invest NI to help them promote Northern Ireland abroad. Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom's offer to the world and will benefit fully from our international trade agreements.
Colin Eastwood.
Well, it's obviously important to bring investment into Northern Ireland. My constituents in Derry are struggling right now with soaring energy bills. Right down the border, a mile across the border, the Irish government is cutting vehicle excess duty by up to 20% for petrol and diesel. This government are very keen and very quick to raise NI contributions. They're also very quick to cut universal credit. Will they be quick to cut vehicle excise duty to save people from the soaring costs that are crippling home budgets?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Look, on the 3rd of February this year, the government announced that the Northern Ireland Executive will receive an additional £250 million to help it support households with the cost of living. He mentions tax changes. It would be imprudent of me as a junior minister to comment ahead of the Chancellor making statements to the House.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. It was a real pity that we couldn't land the return of the World Rally Championship to Belfast in 2022. Could the Minister please confirm that we're going to pull out all of the stops for 2023?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can. We did extensive work with the Department for the Economy. The member for North Antrim was heavily involved in lobbying on that. We think it will be a great thing to bring Northern Ireland, and we are determined to build on the work that we have already done to see if that is possible next year.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Last week, with members of the UK Trade and Business Commission, we were in Northern Ireland where we heard from a major supermarket about the impact that the protocol could have in the future if the grace periods no longer exist. I listened carefully to the Secretary of State's answer to his honourable friend earlier when he suggested an SPS as the way forward. Could we just be clear that the government is seeking an SPS agreement with the EU which does differentiate between the goods that are at risk of going into the EU and those which are not?
Well, firstly, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, who I hold in high regard, I was delighted that he was in Northern Ireland to hear firsthand some of the challenges that Northern Ireland is facing. What we are seeking with the protocol, and we've been very, very clear, the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, is to take the protocol back in its application to how it was intended. And it says in the protocol, the application of the protocol should impact as little as possible on the everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland. It also references the importance of maintaining the integral place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom's internal market. The disruption that the implementation of the protocol is having in Northern Ireland is not sustainable, which is why the government is committed to finding a negotiated solution.
Shadow Minister Tony Antanliatse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On inward investment, Mr. Speaker, the realisation of the redevelopment of Casement Park, a third sporting stadium in Belfast, would give Northern Ireland the opportunity to host sporting events on an international stage and bring communities together. What input or influence, if any, has the Secretary of State on this and his Minister? And The £1.2 billion that the Northern Ireland Executive have returned to the Treasury since 2016, could this be used to realise such projects for Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the comments from the Labour front bench. We look at a whole range of opportunities for investment in Northern Ireland, to give Northern Ireland the opportunity to attract inward investment, to be able to host international events. That's going to be a core part of what we're able to do through levelling up. It's also a key thing the Secretary of State and I have been driving through our city and growth deals to help Northern Ireland, help communities in Northern Ireland attract that investment that creates jobs and prosperity, which is the best way to underpin peace.
Rob Butler.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Northern Ireland Ministers' Elections and Petitions and Concern Act was specifically designed to improve the sustainability of the Northern Ireland institutions. The benefits do include allowing more time and space for the formation of the Executive following an election or the resignation of the First or Deputy First Minister.
Butler.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to serve on the Bill Committee for this legislation, and it's now clear that it was timely given the recent resignations of Northern Ireland's First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he's emphasising to Northern Ireland's political parties that they all need to play their part to work together to achieve stable, devolved government?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I can assure my honourable friend he's absolutely right. I do obviously continue to speak to a range of stakeholders, including the party leaders in Northern Ireland, on the importance of strong, functioning Northern Ireland Executive. And a couple of them in this room this afternoon who I've expressly spoken to and said my desire and talked to them about the importance of having a First and Deputy First Minister nominated both now and after the elections in May.
Stephen Furry.
The government has been clear that it wants to legislate for the language and culture package of NDNA before the Assembly rises for its election. That is only 2 weeks away now. Is that pledge still going to happen in the next 2 weeks?
The honourable gentleman makes a fair point. I'm absolutely committed to making sure we deliver on our promise, as is the Prime Minister, as we set out last summer, to make sure we're delivering on all of our commitments, actually, in the new decade new approach deal that was agreed and brought Stormont back.
Yes. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions to Prime Minister. I start with Pauline Latham.
Question number 1, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Never before has this House listened to an address like the one given yesterday by President Zelensky. And so I want to tell the House that working with our friends and allies across the free world, we will be doing even more in the coming days to protect the people of Ukraine. And, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, will be setting out more details for the House later on. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My son Ben died from an aortic dissection at age 44, leaving a wife and 2 young children, a condition which kills 2,000 people every year needlessly, more than die on the roads. Most people do not know anything about this condition until it devastates their family, like mine. So many of these cases are preventable by identifying those at risk and early and accurate diagnosis. Would the Prime Minister commend the work of the Aortic Dissection Charitable Trust in working with all aspects of the patient pathway about this condition? And in particular, will he commit to public funding for research into the diagnosis of aortic dissection and into genetic screening for it?
Prime Minister.
May I say to my honourable friend first how very sorry I am, as I'm sure the whole House is, for the loss of her son, Ben. And she's a passionate advocate for this work, and I thank the Aortic Dissection Charitable Trust. She's obviously, Mr. Speaker, completely right that accurate, fast diagnosis and treatment is crucial, and that's why I'm very pleased that the National Institute for Health Research is looking to do further work in this area, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will meet her at his earliest convenience.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The typical energy bill is going up by £700 next month, and that's because of pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chancellor's solution? A forced £200 loan for every household, paid back in mandatory instalments over 5 years. The big gamble behind that policy was that energy costs would drop quickly after a short spike. That bet now looks certain to fail. When will the Prime Minister force the Chancellor into a U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend the Chancellor has set out plans to help families with energy costs, with unprecedented measures to abate council tax by £150, Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the other schemes that we are putting forward. And I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right. That we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term and with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Prime Minister understands the mess he's in. Working families are facing a £700 spike in April. They won't even receive their £200 loan from the Chancellor until October. The wholesale price of oil and gas is now ballooning. So, by October, when the loan finally comes in, household bills are set to shoot up by another £1,000. It's a total mess. So I ask again, when is the Prime Minister going to force the Chancellor to U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if he's asking for the Chancellor to U-turn on the support that we're giving to families and households, I think that he's absolutely out of his mind. We are going to continue to give people support throughout this difficult period, as we did throughout the coronavirus epidemic, Mr. Speaker, with unprecedented levels of support. We have a £200 discount on bills, £150 non-repayable reduction in council tax, and £144 million extra to help councils support vulnerable families with their energy bills. Altogether, Mr. Speaker, there is a £20 billion package of financial help that we are giving the British people, and we will continue to do more. I think a U-turn, Mr. Speaker, is the last thing we want.
Mr. Speaker, we'll see how long that position lasts. Let me try and help the Prime Minister. Let me try and help the Prime Minister by coming at it from a different angle. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, North Sea oil and gas companies were making bumper profits. BP made £9.5 billion. Shell made £14 billion. In their own words, more money than they know what to do with. Since then, the international price of oil and gas has skyrocketed, and so will their profits. When will the Prime Minister admit he's got this badly wrong, put a windfall tax on those super profits, and use the money to cut household energy bills?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the net result of that would simply be to see the oil companies put their prices up yet higher, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, make it more difficult for them to do what we need them to do, and which I think, by the way, Mr. Speaker, they are doing very responsibly at the moment, and that is divesting from dependence on Russian oil and gas. And that is the way forward for this country. It is to take a sober, responsible approach, end our dependence on hydrocarbons altogether, and particularly Russian hydrocarbons, and we are taking steps to rectify some of the mistakes made by the Labour government and have a long-term, sustainable, independent energy supply policy. That's what this country needs.
Protecting energy profits, not working people. Doesn't that say it all? Britain can't afford another crisis like this. We need to improve our long-term energy security. That starts with supporting new nuclear and renewables. But the Conservatives have effectively banned new onshore wind. As a direct result of this short-sighted approach, we're using more gas every year than we import from Russia. That's ludicrous. So will the Prime Minister relax planning laws, end the block on onshore wind, and stop supporting policies that make us so dependent on foreign gas?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to the policies that this government has pursued that we actually only are dependent on Russian gas for 3% of our gas needs, unlike virtually every other European country, Mr. Speaker. It's thanks to the massive investment that we've had in renewables, Mr. Speaker, that we are, as I've said many times in this House, the Saudi Arabia of wind power, producer of more offshore wind than virtually any other country in the world, Mr. Speaker. And I think he just, by the way, I think he just committed to supporting, this may be news to some of his party, but he just committed to supporting more nuclear power. Great news. There is more joy in heaven, Mr. Speaker. There is more joy in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, Mr. Speaker, than over 100. I'm delighted. And those were the people, Mr. Speaker, who cancelled our nuclear efforts. They did completely the wrong thing. I'm delighted to welcome them now into the fold.
Come off it. Labour is pro-nuclear. This Prime Minister can't get a single brick laid of a new nuclear plant. Energy security isn't just about supply, it's also about reducing demand. Our housing stock is the least efficient in Europe. That's why Labour set out a plan to upgrade the 19 million British homes that desperately need it within a decade, saving families £400 on their energy bill and cutting UK gas imports by 15%. Whereas all the government have is a failed policy. Taking all their announcements together, it will take 75 years to deliver the upgrades that we need. That's a lifetime when we need urgent action. When is the Prime Minister going to get on with it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just remind the House that under the Labour government, our nuclear output fell from I think about 25% to about 10% of our energy needs. As I recall, it was because of the decisions that they took. We're now going to rectify it, Mr. Speaker, and we're helping households. He asked about the cost of energy bills. We're helping households with the cost of energy bills to the tune of £9.1 billion. Now, why can this government afford to do that? Why can we afford to put huge quantities of taxpayers' money into supporting households and their energy costs? I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. It's because we've got the fastest growth in the G7. And don't forget that if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight, we'd have stayed in lockdown and we'd have never achieved it, Mr. Speaker.
12 years in power, that's the best he can do. The Ukrainian people, Mr. Speaker, the Ukrainian people are fighting for democracy. We must stand with them. That means taking the toughest possible measures against Putin. And let's be honest, there'll be costs here at home. We can withstand those costs, and we must, by using a windfall tax to keep bills down for working people. By starting a new era of energy policy, never again at the mercy of a dictator, supporting new nuclear after years of neglect, sprinting on renewables, including onshore wind, and an urgent national mission to upgrade homes, ending years of dither and delay. So why is the Prime Minister offering the same failed energy policy that cast us into the security crisis and allowed bills to rocket?
Mr. Speaker,
Sorry, Prime Minister. I want to hear the answer, but also standing up's not going to catch my eye. In fact, it's got the opposite effect on me. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are junking is the failed energy policies that left us without enough nuclear power, Mr. Speaker. And what we are going to do is go forward with policies that allow this country to be independent in our energy supply, maximising renewables, Mr. Speaker, making sure that we use transitional hydrocarbons and going for nuclear as well. As I say, I'm overjoyed that Labour now seems to occupy that position. But what we will also do, Mr. Speaker, and here he has been supportive, is make sure that as a House of Commons we work together to maintain our opposition to Vladimir Putin's vile war in Ukraine. And there, together with the toughest possible economic sanctions, by maintaining our military support for the people of Ukraine, I have no doubt that though there will be dark days ahead and difficult times, Mr. Speaker, we will come through it stronger. And I have no doubt that Vladimir Putin will fail and we will succeed in restoring a sovereign and independent Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over 2 decades, Thames Water has been trying to build a reservoir in my constituency that would be over 30 metres high and cover the equivalent of over 2,500 football pitches. This has been a shadow over the local community, who don't think they've proven the need for this proposal. Does my right honourable friend agree that if a company seeks to do something like this, it has to show why it's needed, why it's better than the alternatives, and what the environmental impact will be? They can't behave as though it's inevitable, whether the local community want it or not.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. He's a fantastic champion for his constituents in Wantage. As I understand it, the decision on the Abingdon Reservoir has not actually been made, but we would expect Thames Water to consult further on the proposal, and I know that they will have heard the points that my honourable friend has rightly made.
We now come to SNP leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are now 14 days into Putin's war, and in that time I've generally tried to work constructively with the UK government, and I will continue to seek to do this. However, nobody should support this government when it comes to the response to the refugee crisis. 760 visa approvals in 2 weeks is disgraceful. In that time, Poland has taken over 1.2 million refugees. Hungary has taken over 190,000 refugees. Germany has taken over 50,000 refugees. Italy, over 7,000 refugees. Ireland, a country of just over 5 million people, has given sanctuary to 3 times as many refugees as the United Kingdom. These numbers don't lie. They tell a devastating truth. Does the Prime Minister find it acceptable that his Home Secretary has overseen one of the slowest, most bureaucratic and incompetent refugee responses in the whole of Europe?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody sympathises with the plight of refugees, and this government wants to do everything we can to welcome them, and that is indeed what we are doing. And the numbers are almost 1,000 as I speak to him today, and they will rise very sharply, Mr. Speaker. They are uncapped. We expect those numbers to rise to in the region of the hundreds of thousands. As Vladimir Putin doubles down in his attacks, we will go further, Mr. Speaker, and there will be routes by which the whole country can offer a welcome to people from Ukraine, vulnerable people fleeing from Ukraine. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will be setting out that route in the course of the next few days. This government has a proud record. We've done more to resettle vulnerable people than any other European country since 2015.
Ian Blackford.
I don't think the Prime Minister understands the scale of the challenge or the urgency. These are people fleeing war crimes, torn apart from their families as their homes are shelled, and the Home Secretary is blocking them with endless paperwork. This isn't just incompetence, this is ideology. In the face of the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War, the UK government won't set aside the hostile environment. And by the way, we're seeing the hostile environment this afternoon. They might quieten down a bit. We've seen this too many times from a Tory Home Office. The Windrush scandal, the Go Home vans, the inhumane Nationality and Borders Bill. The UK Home Office is raising barriers and bureaucracy when we should be offering care and compassion. Prime Minister, do not let the history of failure repeat itself. Scotland stands ready to offer sanctuary and refuge. So will the Prime Minister join with the rest of the European continent and waive the visa restrictions for refugees fleeing war in Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this country has an unparalleled record. And look, just since I have been Prime Minister, Look at the numbers we've taken from Afghanistan, from Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker. He lectures the Home Secretary. This is a government unlike any other. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are directly descended, Mr. Speaker, from refugees. And we understand how much refugees have to give to this country, and we understand how much this country has to gain from welcoming refugees. And we will be generous, and we are being generous, Mr. Speaker. And what we are doing is making sure that in those neighbouring countries, the UK is out in front, giving the humanitarian assistance. And we are in every capital, Mr. Speaker. They laugh, Mr. Speaker, they mock, they scoff. This country is leading in every respect, but we are also the single biggest donor of humanitarian aid to the Ukraine war zone, Mr. Speaker. The single biggest donor, and he should be proud of that.
Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Prime Minister's response to this Ukrainian crisis, but I think people across the country are genuinely concerned on our response on refugees, on the bureaucracy, on the tone of our response. He's shown with vaccines that government change really comes from the very top. Please can I urge him to look at again on resetting our policy and taking control of a more humane approach to those women and men fleeing from Ukraine.
I thank him very much. He will have. I thank him very much. I thank him for all the work that he does in this area. But I hope he will have heard what I've just said in my earlier answer to the leader of the SNP, which is, Mr. Speaker, that this government is, I think, unlike any other in our understanding of what refugees can give and the benefits to this country. And we've done more than any other to resettle vulnerable people since 2015. I think that there is a huge opportunity now for us to do even more, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will be setting out a route by which the British people, not just the family reunion route, which can run into the hundreds of thousands, Mr. Speaker, but also a route by which everybody in this country can offer a home to people fleeing Ukraine. And my right honourable friend will be setting that out in the course of the next few days.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be acutely aware of the pressures facing households across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland, with the rapid increase in the cost of heating homes and running a motor vehicle. Heating a home has more than doubled for many households in Northern Ireland in recent weeks. Will the Prime Minister commit to bring forward a package of measures designed to help households, including a cut in VAT on home heating fuel, reducing or cutting excise duty on fuel for motorists? And will he ensure that those measures apply to Northern Ireland, where the Northern Ireland Protocol once again presents a problem in this government taking control over the affairs of all of the United Kingdom? Will the decisions that the Treasury take apply to the whole of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that we do everything to support the people of the whole of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and we've already extended a further £250 million to help the people of Northern Ireland with the costs of living, particularly heating. As he knows, excise on fuel has been frozen for the last 12 years, and we will ensure that the people of Northern Ireland continue to be protected, along with everybody in the UK, from the cost of living crisis. But the House should be in no doubt that the pressures on energy will continue. We need a pan-UK solution, and that's what we're going to be setting out.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, the world has changed. Energy security is vital, but so too is food security. Our food and drink manufacturers and those in the food chain proved their worth during the pandemic. Given the importance to our country of this sector and the need to ensure its competitiveness, its resilience and a high degree of self-sufficiency, will the Prime Minister now take the opportunity to review many of the proposed regulatory burdens, such as HFSS and the promotional and marketing restrictions, which could adversely affect this important sector at this critical time?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right that food security is a crucial issue, and it is affected, of course, by the cost of energy. And the energy inputs into agriculture are certainly something that we need to address. There is also a separate issue, Mr. Speaker, to do with childhood obesity. The House passed measures already in the autumn, the ones to which he refers. We're giving the industry more time to adjust to the impact of those measures.
Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in addition to the increase in fuel prices, our constituents are reporting to us that the energy companies are doubling standing charges. In France, energy supply company EDF has had energy price rises to domestic customers capped at 4%. But this government price cap allows EDF to increase prices to UK customers by 54%. Ooh. My question is why?
Mr. Speaker, we have an overall cap, and obviously the EDF is incorporated differently in the UK from its incorporation in France. But we will do everything in our power to abate the costs of energy across the country, as we already are, Mr. Speaker. But what it needs is a short-term, medium-term and long-term energy strategy so that we have sustainable supplies.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Soon after I was elected, I found out that at Shotley Bridge, an 8-bed community hospital in my constituency is replaced with a 0-bed unit, something some Labour councillors had known about but said nothing about during the election campaign. After campaigning hard with ministers and the Secretary of State and working with my local NHS trust, a new 16-bed unit is now in the final stages of planning and has been confirmed as part of this government's hospital building programme. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this new community hospital is now full steam ahead, and will he commit to coming to concert to kick off the building works if the plan goes to head by the end of next year?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted there'll be a new hospital at Shotley Bridge. I congratulate him on all the work he's done to lobby for it. And, Mr. Speaker, what it proves that this government is getting on, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of war in Ukraine, this government is getting on with the job.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've just been to a very harrowing meeting with families affected. They have members of families in care homes and hospitals, and they've suffered unjustifiable denial of access to those loved ones and have been massively restricted. And it continues despite the post-COVID environment. Would the Prime Minister be prepared to introduce legislation to make access to loved ones in care homes and hospitals a legal right and not at the discretion of the care home or the hospital concerned?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and I think everybody understands the anguish of people who haven't been able to see their loved ones during the pandemic. We have relaxed the restrictions in care homes, as he knows. If I'd be very happy to offer a meeting for him and the relevant health minister to discuss his further concerns.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, the government's already stopped issuing golden visas, so they can't be exploited by oligarchs and crime lords. But some could already be here, living in luxury London penthouse flats they've bought with dirty cash. So, will the Prime Minister pledge that anybody who is put on the sanctions list in the coming days and is already in the UK on a golden visa will have it ripped up so they can be thrown out?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that, and I thank the House for what we've done to accelerate the economic crime measures, because we will be able to whip aside the veil of anonymity. Mr. Speaker, the ownership of these luxurious dwellings to which he refers will be exposed, and yes, we will be able to take away their ability to remain in this country.
Barbara Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As energy costs spiral, I want to raise the issue for people who use extra electricity to charge their electric wheelchairs or to run ventilators or a stair lift. It is not right that people with a disability or a serious medical condition should face unmanageable debt or going without food to pay the cost of electricity on which they absolutely rely. They need a real cut to their bills right now, So why isn't the Prime Minister looking at drawing on the profits of the North Sea oil and gas companies to help the most vulnerable families with those costs?
I thank her very much. She raises a very important issue, and clearly the spike in energy prices is going to fall most heavily on vulnerable people such as the ones that she has mentioned, and we will certainly be looking at ways to abate their costs.
Paul Holmes.
I don't know what I've done to deserve that. Residents in the village of Hamble in my constituency are currently facing the prospect of a quarry being given planning permission with 144 lorries per day in this congested area with one road access. Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me to discuss how we can tighten the regulations on where quarries can be built to take into account the health implication, our environment and our local communities?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's a great champion for Eastleigh. The planning framework is robust and should ensure that quarries don't have an adverse impact on the environment or on health, but I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss his concerns further.
Abhinav Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen in recent weeks how serious and dangerous Russia's covert influence in Britain can be. Yeah. We have seen that Putin actively seeks to influence the culture, media and politics of democratic nations. Yeah. Our national security is of the greatest importance, and Britain cannot become home to those that prop up Putin and his war. With that in mind, has the Prime Minister ever overruled security service advice when appointing a peer to the other place?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and actually the Kremlin has singled out the UK for being in the lead on global sanctions, and as they have, and Mr. Speaker, in leading the world in defiance of the odious war that Putin is leading in Ukraine.
Greg Clark.
Yesterday, President Zelensky drew on the words of Churchill in this chamber. And as we salute the courage of the people of Ukraine, it reminds us that we can meet in freedom today only because of the courage of a generation of men and women who, in the Second World War, defended us from annihilation. Among them is my friend, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, DFC, who flew his de Havilland Mosquito in 50 missions over Nazi Germany. Colin Bell is with us today. On Saturday, he celebrated his 101st birthday. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing Colin a very happy birthday and thanking him for what he did for allowing us to be here today?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House will want to join me in thanking him and wishing Colin Bell a very happy 101st birthday.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People across these islands have displayed remarkable generosity, including in Argyll and Bute, where Oban Helps Ukraine have been overwhelmed by donations of money, of clothes and of offers of shelter. Sadly, this government's reluctance to allow fleeing women and children to come here lags far behind the desire of the people here to provide them with a roof and a bed. Doesn't the Prime Minister fear that when this war is concluded, and despite whatever else it may have done, that his government will stand accused of lacking the one thing the Ukrainian people needed most: basic humanity?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't think that question reflects the views of people around the world, and nor does it, Mr. Speaker, does it reflect reality, because this government has done more than any other European country to support people by way of direct bilateral humanitarian aid, Mr. Speaker, and we have two very generous schemes for allowing people to come to this country. This is a government that believes in welcoming people fleeing from zones of conflict. And, Mr. Speaker, if he shakes his head, look at our record. Look at what we've done. Just in the last 2 years, and he should be proud. He should be proud of what we've done.
Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, we were pleased to welcome both the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State to Blackpool the day after the launch of the Doubling Up White Paper. Will he meet with me to discuss how we can make sure that Blackpool is not just a testbed for innovation in many of the areas of Doubling Up, but a showcase for the impact it can have on the community that I represent?
I thank him for his wonderful work in Blackpool for communities he represents, and it was fantastic to be with him and to see the increase, the extension and the upgrading of the tram network in Blackpool, Mr. Speaker, that will help to drive the economy and help to bring high-wage, high-skilled jobs in just the way that we hope to do that across the whole of the UK as we get on with levelling up.
Ed Davey.
Speaker, in the months before World War II, the UK took in over 60,000 Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. Over half a century ago, we took in over 27,000 Ugandans expelled by Idi Amin. Since then, we've taken Tamils escaping civil war, Bosnians escaping genocide, and Syrians escaping Assad. But this week, the Home Office turned away hundreds of Ukrainian refugees escaping Putin's bombs because they didn't have the right paperwork. Can the Prime Minister not see that this flies in the face of our country's proud tradition of providing sanctuary? And since the Home Office clearly isn't up to the task, will the Prime Minister send in armed forces personnel to speed up the process so Ukrainian refugees can come here quickly and safely?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and the whole House wants to do as much as we can and as fast as possible. But what he says about the UK is, I'm afraid, completely wrong, Mr. Speaker, because we have visa centres open in Warsaw, in Budapest, in Prague, in Jeszczał, in Poland, in Chisinau, in Moldova, Bucharest, and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. We've already got 1,000 people in under the existing scheme. That number will climb very sharply, Mr. Speaker. Look at what we've done already. 15,000 from Afghanistan, 104,000 applications from Hong Kong Chinese, and I think there were about 25,000 from Syria. No one has been turned away, Mr. Speaker. That is simply, we want to be as generous and Mr. Speaker. It is important to have checks. Let me make this point to the House, because I think people need to understand. There are some people, Mr. Speaker, who would like to dispense with checks altogether and simply to wave people through. And I've got to say, and I hear the voices on the benches opposite. I do think that is irresponsible, and that is not the approach that we should be taking. The Schengen countries have a different arrangement. We must be in no doubt, as I said in answer to a previous question, the Kremlin has singled out this country for the approach that we are taking. Vladimir Putin, and we know how unscrupulous Putin can be in his methods. It would not be right, Mr. Speaker, to expose this country to unnecessary security risk, and we will not do it, Mr. Speaker. We are going to be as generous as we can possibly be, but we must have checks.
Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, my community in Tipton came together on Sunday to commemorate the 100 years since the devastating explosion of the Dudley Port munitions factory and the 19 girls who were recklessly murdered by the owner of that factory. Now, in the Black Country, it's vital that we acknowledge both the pride but also the pain of our industrial heritage. And can I ask my right honourable friend, therefore, to reaffirm his commitment today to the Black Country, to ensure that we honour that legacy of those girls in that factory in Dudley Port 100 years ago. And the one way that my right honourable friend can do that for my community in Tipton is to come to Tipton, Mr. Speaker, and see that beating heart of the Black Country who will welcome him with open arms.
Well, Mr. Speaker, long ago, when I was a reporter, Tipton was on my beat many years ago, and wild horses wouldn't keep me away from Tipton. I'll be back.
Ronnie Cowan's final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I have a constituent whose elderly parents are seeking refuge in the United Kingdom from Ukraine. Her parents are both in their 80s. They've made it to Hungary. They went to the visa application centre, as instructed by the Home Office hotline, and they were told, come back on the 22nd of March. Then, and only then, will their biometrics be processed. That is a harsh reality, no spin, no subterfuge. Prime Minister, when will refugees from the Ukraine be welcome into the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Listen, I thank him. If you'd be kind enough, I'd be grateful if he'd pass me the details of the case that he mentions, and I'd be happy to give it to my right honourable friend. We are moving heaven and earth, Mr. Speaker, because we understand the value to this country of refugees. We also understand the imperative of helping people fleeing a war zone in terror. And that's why the people of this country want to open their arms. And we are going to help them to do it, Mr. Speaker, with a new humanitarian route in addition to the family reunion route that we have already set out. That family reunion route alone, Mr. Speaker, could bring hundreds of thousands of people here. And I think the whole House understands that. We will do even more through the new humanitarian route.
That's the end of Prime Minister's questions. Please leave quietly. All right, John. So we now come to the statement from the Secretary of State for Defence, Right Honourable Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to update the House on the situation in Ukraine and HMG support to the government in Kiev. Mr. Speaker, the situation on the ground is grave. As we can recall, on the 24th of February, forces of the Russian army, unprovoked, crossed into Ukraine's sovereign territory. Along three main axes, Russian armour has attempted to occupy Ukraine. Their plan was to reach and encircle Kyiv, encircle Ukrainian forces near the border, and invade from the south to link up with their forces via Mariupol. Russian High Command had committed 65% of their entire land forces and indisputably are in possession of overwhelming firepower and armour. It is estimated that at the start of this invasion, they had between 110 and 120 battalion tactical groups dedicated to the task, compared to approximately 65 in Ukraine. Their missile stocks gave them even greater strength to reach Ukraine at distance. However, what they did not possess, and still do not, is the moral component so often needed for victory. Mr. Speaker, after 14 days of the war, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, at the 6th of March, Russian casualties were assessed to include 285 tanks, 985 armoured fighting vehicles, 109 artillery systems, 50 multiple launch rocket systems, 44 aircraft, 48 helicopters, and 11,000 soldiers who have lost their lives needlessly. There are numerous reports of surrenders and desertions by the ever-growing, disillusioned Russian army. But to be clear, Mr. Speaker, these are Ukrainian figures, and I have to caution the House that we have not verified them by defence intelligence or other means. Of the initial Russian objectives, I can announce to the House that it is our assessment that they have been successful in achieving only one. And while Russian forces are in control of Kherson, Melitopol, Berdyansk in southern Ukraine, they currently encircle the cities of Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkov and Mariupol, but are not in control of them. In addition, Mr. Speaker, their first-day objectives of targeting Ukrainian air defence has failed, preventing total air dominance. The Ukrainian armed forces have put up a strong defence while mobilising the whole population. President Putin's arrogant assumption that he would be welcomed as a liberator has deservedly crumbled as fast as his troops' morale. For our part, Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom continues to play a leading role in supporting Ukraine. On the 17th of January, I announced to the House the government's intentions to supply military aid to the Ukrainian armed forces. The aid took the form of body armour, helmets, boots, ear defenders, ration packs, rangefinders and communication equipment, and for the first time, it also included weapon systems. The initial supply was to be 2,000 new light anti-tank weapons, small arms and ammunition. Mr. Speaker, in response to further acts of aggression by Russia, we have now increased that supply. I can update the House that as of today, we have delivered 3,615 NLAWs and continue to deliver more. We will shortly be starting the delivery of small consignment of anti-tank Javelin missiles as well. I want to assure the House that everything we do is bound by the decision to supply defensive systems and are calibrated not to escalate to a strategic level. Britain was the first European country to supply lethal aid, and I was pleased that not long after a military aid donor conference I held on the 25th of February, that many more countries decided to do the same. From right across Europe, the donations came. In particular, I want to highlight the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, Belgium and Slovenia for their leadership. And we should not ignore the significance of the German government in joining us in a change of stance and donating such aid. Donations, Mr. Speaker, are not enough. The delivery of the aid to the front line is just as important. Here again, Britain is leading, because alongside Canada, the United States and Sweden, we have invested in building Ukrainian military capacity since 2015, and we find ourselves able to coordinate the delivery alongside our partners. As the conflict intensifies, Mr. Speaker, the Russians are changing their tactics, and so the Ukrainians need to too. We can all see the horrific devastation inflicted on civilian areas by Russian artillery and airstrikes, indiscriminate and murderous. It is vital, therefore, that Ukraine maintains its ability to fly and to suppress Russian air attack. To date, the international community has donated over 900 man-portable air defence missiles and thousands of anti-tank guided weapons of varying types, as well as various small arms. But the capability needs strengthening. So in response to Ukrainian requests, the government has taken the decision to explore the donation of Starstreak high-velocity man-portable anti-air missiles. We believe that this system will remain within the definition of defensive weapons, but will allow the Ukrainian force to better defend their skies. We shall also be increasing the supplies of rations, medical equipment and other non-lethal military aid. As with any war, the civilian population is suffering horrendous hardships. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Education, 211 schools have been damaged or destroyed, and media footage shows Russian strikes hitting kindergartens. The Cherniv Regional Administration reported that Russian Air Force was employing FAB 500 unguided bombs against targets in the city. And according to Human Rights Watch, civilians in Mariupol have now been without water and power for almost a week. President Zelensky talked of children dying of thirst. Today, the estimated number of Ukrainian civilians killed or injured now stands at over 1,000. The true figure is expected to be much higher, and I'm afraid worse is likely to come. It is for that reason that the UK will increase its funding for Ukraine to £220 million, which includes £120 million of humanitarian aid. This will make the United Kingdom the single biggest bilateral humanitarian donor to Ukraine. We are also supporting humanitarian work with the Polish and Romanian governments on the borders. As I said, Mr. Speaker, in my last statement, we still believe it is worth trying to build diplomatic pressure on Russia. This week, my good friend the Prime Minister met the Prime Ministers of Canada, the Netherlands and Poland. He also spoke to the leaders of France, Germany and the United States, and Prime Ministers of Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The Foreign Secretary is in Washington at the G7 and also attended NATO foreign ministers earlier this month. And I myself only this morning met with the Ukrainian ambassador. President Putin should be and can be in no doubt that the international community is united against his actions. It remains strong and will not back down. As well as providing direct military support to Ukraine, we continue to bolster our contribution towards NATO's collective security. NATO defence ministers will gather next week in Brussels to discuss the next steps. The UK is doing its bit in providing military support and reassurance to its allies. We are currently supplying significant air power to NATO, including increase in air patrols with both Typhoon and F-35s under NATO air policing. We have also deployed additional 4 Typhoons to Cyprus to patrol NATO's eastern border and sent an additional 800 troops to Estonia. Over the last week, Apache and Chinook helicopters were involved in exercises in Estonia. And meanwhile, HMS Diamond has sailed to the eastern Mediterranean. HMS Northumberland is taking part in a northern deployment, and HMS Grimsby is in the Norwegian Sea supporting NATO mine countermeasures. On Monday, HMS Prince of Wales, RFI Turge Surge and HMS Defender joined HMS Albion and RFA Mounts Bays on exercise Cold Response, a multinational exercise off the coast of Norway. And HMS Richmond will be exercising with our Joint Expeditionary Force. We have put more than 1,000 more British troops on readiness to support humanitarian responses in the bordering countries. Britain's contribution to NATO is significant and enduring. It's important at this time that in order to maximise our reassurance and resilience effect, we coordinate through NATO and the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Few of us, Mr. Speaker, will not have been moved by President Zelensky's speech yesterday. His people are fighting for their very survival. His country is united against the aggression, and it is indeed his country's darkest hour. Yesterday I saw footage of a Russian armoured train bristling with guns, heading towards Mariupol. A brave, single woman from Ukraine ran to that train and shouted, "Slavo Ukrainia." Unmoved, unintimidated by the guns, the woman's bravery should inspire us all. I know many of our constituents, Mr. Speaker, and our colleagues are fearful of what happens next. President Putin and the Kremlin continue to threaten countries who offer help to Ukraine. Their military campaign will, I'm afraid, get more brutal and more indiscriminate. But, Mr. Speaker, it is my firm belief that our strength to stand up to such bullying comes from our alliances. As long as we stand united, both as a House and as the international community, then the Kremlin's threats cannot hurt us. We should take strength from the peoples right across Europe who are standing shoulder to shoulder to protect our values, our freedom, our tolerance, our democracy and our free press. That is our shield.
Yeah. We now come to the Shadow Secretary of State, John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Defence Secretary and his team for the way that he's kept members on all sides updated and informed, and I thank him for his statement this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, President Zelensky spoke for his country when he told us yesterday, "We will not give up and we will not lose." His address, like his leadership, was deeply moving, deeply inspiring. Ukrainians are showing massive bravery, both military and civilians alike, and we must do all we can to support their resistance. So the government has Labour's full backing for military and intelligence assistance to Ukraine to defend itself. And I welcome the Defence Secretary's statement today, the detail of the further weapons and equipment that Britain has been able to provide Ukraine to defend itself. I welcome the role we're playing in coordinating help from other countries to Ukraine. Can I urge him to conclude the examination he's now giving to the provision of Starstreak missiles as quickly as possible? These are exactly the sort of ground-to-air missiles needed to defend against Russian air attacks. Can I ask him more broadly, are these supplies to Ukraine solely from our UK stockpiles? Is the MOD purchasing also from other countries to respond to Ukrainian requests? And have other non-NATO, non-European countries with weaponry or well-trained air forces yet been involved? Mr. Speaker, it's clear that President Putin miscalculated on the resolve of the Ukrainian military and on the strength of his own Russian forces. Putin planned for a short campaign without the provision of logistics for protracted fighting and occupation. So what is the MOD's assessment of how far the Russians have now rectified this? And I think he said 65%, but could he confirm what proportion of Russian forces that were on Ukraine's borders and off her coast have now been deployed into Ukraine? This is only still week 2. Russia has such crushing firepower, Putin has such utter ruthlessness that we must expect more than one of his military objectives to be taken over the next few weeks. We must expect greater brutality with still further civilian casualties. And our thoughts and our prayers are with the residents of Kiev and those other great Ukrainian cities as they face encirclement and bombardment from Russian forces. Whatever the short-term gains Putin may secure, we must make sure he fails in the longer run. Through Ukrainian resistance, tougher sanctions, more humanitarian help, wider international isolation, justice for the war crimes being committed, and above all, lasting Western unity. We must be ready to deal with the consequences of this invasion, Mr. Speaker, for many years to come. It is, however, clear that Putin has also miscalculated on the international resolve to isolate Russia and on the strength of Western and NATO unity. Our Labour commitment to NATO is unshakable, and the government again has our full support for reinforcing NATO nations on the alliance's eastern border with Russia. The Labour leader and I fly out tonight to Tallinn to reassure Estonia of the united UK determination to defend their security and to thank our British forces deployed there from the Royal Tank Regiment and the Royal Welsh Battle Group. Mr. Speaker, it was Labour's post-war Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin who was the principal architect of NATO and in particular its Article 5 commitment to collective defence. Today is the anniversary of Bevin's birth in 1881. So today, let President Putin be in no doubt that our commitment to Article 5 is absolute. And let him not mistake NATO's restraint for any lack of resolve. Mr. Speaker, NATO's responsible force has been activated, as the Defence Secretary has said, in response to this NATO aggression. We welcome the detail of the UK's contribution to that. But what is the role also of the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force? What is the role that they could play? And is it not time for NATO to issue an initiating directive to the Supreme Allied Commander to plan future options as part of overhauling NATO, necessarily for the decade ahead? And could the Defence Secretary confirm what I think he said, which is that the 1,000 UK troops put on standby before the invasion are still in Britain, still on standby, and we've received no requests for the humanitarian help they were designed to respond to? Mr. Speaker, it's not the job of British forces to protect the failing Home Secretary or bail out border force, especially at this critical time of conflict. But yesterday, the Defence Secretary said help for Ukrainians fleeing the war had not been quick enough. He said he was offering MOD assistance to the Home Office. Has this offer been accepted? What role will military personnel play, where and for how long? And, Mr. Speaker, as we confront aggression abroad, we need to strengthen our defences at home. A national resilience strategy was promised a year ago. When will this be published? The integrated review, published a year ago, made the Prime Minister's first focus the Indo-Pacific. It neglected the need to rebuild relations with essential European allies and the European Union, and it planned to cut the British Army still further. Will the government now rethink such fundamental flaws in its integrated review? And finally, Mr. Speaker, if I may, we expect a big budget boost for defence in the Chancellor's spring statement in 2 weeks' time. With Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government must respond to new threats to the UK and European security, just as Labour in government did after the Twin Towers attacks on 9/11. If the government does act, it will again have Labour's full support.
I am going to make mention of it. It's a very, very important issue. But front benches have to be in line with the rules. I've got to enforce the rules. It says 5 minutes, that was 7. Please, as important as if you want me to grant UQs, you want me to support statements, you've got to work with me to ensure that we don't take the time from other agendas that are here It was very much shorter over. I do keep clock of the time, and I don't need to get into an argument about it. I would say the Labour front bench took a lot longer. And I'm just going to say it's a very important matter. I want to keep this on the agenda, but you need to work with me to ensure that we or change the rules, make my life easier. So stay.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I should apologise. I didn't give the Labour front bench long enough with the statement. I think it was fairly short notice for them in advance. So I think we both hear from both sides. You wouldn't like me to be too long either. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the right, certainly on the backbench of the Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman makes some important questions, and I'm grateful for the Labour Party's support to the position that the government has taken on Ukraine. Our position actually mirrors also the international community, not just NATO members, but also members outside NATO, such as Sweden and Finland. In answer to his questions, Mr. Speaker, the stockpile, we will take them currently from our stockpile, but we will backfill them from the manufacturer where we can and when we can. We already have some on order, so I can give him that assurance. I also make sure we keep a basic level to ensure that we cover our own force protection as required. So we're not going to leave our soldiers at risk in somewhere like Estonia specifically, but nevertheless we will make sure that we calibrate that correctly. On the issue of the MOD's assessment of the Russian forces, over 90% of those forces that are on the border have now been committed to Ukraine and inside Ukraine. And of course we can see media reports about Belarusian forces maybe or maybe not being primed. That has had an interesting effect on Belarusian forces, with reports of desertions and senior officers refusing to join the fight. And also, I think there's something very telling about Russia's desperation at the moment. We've seen significant amounts of effort to try and bring Wagner Group into Ukraine, Wagner Group being the wholly unacceptable mercenary company responsible for all sorts of atrocities in Africa and the Middle East. And the fact that Russia is now trying to encourage them to take part in Ukraine, I think, is a telling sign. It doesn't give us any comfort, but it is nevertheless a sign. In answer to the honourable gentleman's questions about Jeff, I went last week to Copenhagen to meet with my Swedish, Lithuanian and Danish counterpart as they set off to join our EFP in Estonia. The Danish have sent a company of armoured infantry that was going to be escorted across the sea by a Swedish and Danish ship with air cover coming from Sweden, and that was a JEF deployment. A very good example of how, in the neighbourhood of the Nordics, we come together either bilaterally or multilaterally to make sure that we can provide greater defence. After our meeting in Leicestershire, Rutland actually, a few weeks ago, we determined to have a longer programme of joint planning so we can make sure we maximise our capabilities in exercises and activity, and we will see more of the JEF, and I'm very happy to continue to keep the House absolutely informed. On Article 5, I am grateful for the reminder of Bevan's birthday. Forgive me, on this side of the House, I would not be carrying that date particularly. I am always welcome to be educated. I have some Labour in my own family, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure they know in 1881 either. But nevertheless, the commitment to Article 5 is important. Yesterday I met my counterpart from North Macedonia, the newest member of NATO. And the thing I think is important about Britain's attitude to NATO is we're not in it for what we can get out of it. We're in it because we fundamentally believe in defending each other, whether you're big or small, and we all stand for the same values. So I was pleased to meet it. Mr. Speaker, I promise to keep members of the House informed of Ukraine no matter what happens. My team is available, Chief of Defence Intelligence is available, and I will happily continue to do either dial-ins or indeed as many briefings as possible, both at Privy Council and non-Privy Council levels. On the point about the Home Office, the honourable gentleman asked the question. We have offered, the offer has been accepted in principle. There is a meeting straight after this between Defence Ministers, Home Office Ministers and Foreign Office Ministers to make sure we coordinate what assistance we can give to speed up that visa process, which I think is incredibly important to do. Just on the IR, I think it is important not to mischaracterise the IR. I know the Honourable Gentleman has said this before. The actual quote in the IR about Russia is, quote, the greatest nuclear, conventional, military and sub-threshold threat to European security, to strengthen Europe, which is critical to preserving our security and prosperity of the Atlantic. The IR did not miss Europe, did not miss Russia. In fact, it squarely identified it as our main adversary, and I think it would be wrong to characterise it as everyone's off to the Pacific. Certainly, if you look at the balance of my investments, as I've made as Defence Secretary, and the investments in basing and expeditionary forces such as JEF, that is in Europe and Northern Europe as well. So I think that is incredibly important. I shall pass on details to the relevant ministry. I suspect it's the Cabinet Office in charge of the National Resilience Strategy, and like him, I look forward to reading it.
William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend and the Government and the Prime Minister on the manner in which they're conducting themselves in relation to this dreadful invasion in Ukraine. Could I also add, having just come back from a conference in Paris, where I had the honour to lead the European Select Committee delegation in conjunction with all the other countries in the whole of Europe, how much they appreciate what we're doing here in the United Kingdom. And could I also just mention that my son actually is currently in Poland and in Hungary on humanitarian work, and I trust that other people will be able to do much the same, because this is so important, not only to our constituents, but to the whole of fairness, justice in the world. I want to thank my honourable friend for everything that he's done.
Yeah. So state.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his kind comments? Can I just say on the humanitarian work, it's incredibly important that we recognise this is not just a military response. The scale of the humanitarian crisis that will only grow as Russia seeks to punish the innocent for having the tenacity to stand up to them means that we have to all lean in as an international community. I would urge colleagues who have emails from numerous constituents wanting to help that we channel them in the right direction. Some of us are old enough to remember the Bosnia War, and I know from soldiers on the ground at the time, there were lots of people who meant well, who would drive out there and then find themselves putting themselves at risk, and indeed some of the forces whose job it was to protect them. So I think we just need to make sure it is properly coordinated. I'll get details for honourable and right honourable members in the House so that they can point their constituents in the right direction. Thank you.
SNP spokesperson Stuart M. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary for advance sight of the statement, and like the Shadow Secretary and the Secretary of State himself, put on record how grateful we are to President Zelensky for taking the time to talk to this House yesterday. It's a moment, I'm sure, that will stay with all of us for a long, long time to come. Mr. Speaker, to the content of the statement says that the Secretary and the Department will explore the donation of these new anti-air missiles. I guess we just want to urge them to conclude that as swiftly as possible and ensure that they get there as swiftly as possible, because it is the case that as this conflict goes on, second week going into its third as it is now, Ukraine's needs will adapt, and the support we give them has to adapt with that. I do also want to ask the Secretary, because I know we talked about this before, it might actually have been with his Armed Forces Minister, the supply of satellite phones, which I know Ukraine had identified as an urgent need for 2 weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, I do also want to ask about this issue of the jets from Poland. As I understand the situation at the moment, the US has declined its involvement in that, but the Department of Defence has said it will keep it under review. Is the Secretary of State part of that discussion to keep it under review, not least given the new security and defence arrangements that the Department announced around 6 or 7 weeks ago involving Poland and Ukraine itself? And how might we expect that to develop in the coming days? Because time is not on Ukraine's side, and I appreciate the immense sensitivities around this. Mr. Speaker, like many others, I want to welcome the additional military aid, the non-lethal aid, the humanitarian support, and of course welcome all of the efforts of our constituents up and down the land in supporting Ukrainians in their time of need. On NATO, Mr. Speaker, can I ask about the forthcoming strategic concept? What sort of changes can we expect to see there? Will we, for example, see the air policing mission be reprofiled to an air defence mission? And can he talk a bit more about what the House can expect to come from that? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, because you would expect me to, just to say, on the issue of refugees, We have tried, and in fairness, the government has made it easy on many things to support the government and the front bench in its support for Ukraine in many other areas. But on refugees, we are simply standing out in Europe for all the wrong reasons. And I am pleading with the Minister, although it's not his department, to fix it and fix it soon.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. On the latter, look, we are, like you, determined to fix it. My honourable friend, the Minister of the Armed Forces, will have a meeting this afternoon on exactly that. I think we shouldn't forget that the overall offer is generous, 200,000 in the families route and unlimited in the humanitarian. The key here is to get it sped up, to make sure that when people arrive in that border, they are home and safe with their families as soon as possible. And we will do everything in the Department Ministry of Defence to support that happening. On the other issue, on jets in Poland, I don't have access to those discussions. I have said publicly that the position the United Kingdom government would take is, look, it is a matter for the Polish government to make its decision on its calibration, on its aid to Ukraine, but as an ally and friend of Poland, Britain will stand by whatever decision they make. It is, of course, them on the front line, off that border, and whatever consequence were to happen of that, I would hope the consequence would only be a positive if they did it, but you never know with President Putin. So it's very important to give them the reassurance and the space to make the decision. But fundamentally, what we see at the moment is the requirement of the Ukrainians are things like being able to take action against artillery at deep ranges, and that can be done through the UAVs, to protect their airspace, and that can be done with the missile systems that we are providing at the moment. The only lag with the missile systems we're doing is, as they get more complicated, they need training. How and why we deliver that training and how we do it is obviously sensitive, but we have to make sure that is rolled out, and obviously the movement of it into Ukraine. They are valuable pieces of equipment that need to be positioned in the right places to make the difference, and I think that is just one of the reasons why I've wanted to come to the House as soon as possible to say we are in principle going to do it, but we want to make sure that you had as early warning as possible. The honourable gentleman makes a really important point about the strategic concept and NATO. I think I'll too be asking some of the questions about what now for it. I think there are questions for NATO both in short term, Mr. Speaker, and long term. So in the long term, what are we going to do post-Ukraine to contain Russia, to provide reassurance to our neighbours and our fellow NATO members, and resilience to those countries in NATO who will need it? And I think I would hope that we start the process at the meeting next week of indicating to Saka that I would like to see him start planning for containment, if that is one of the options post-Ukraine. And what does that look like in the 21st century? Thank you very much.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and for all that his department and our incredible armed forces are doing at this time to help the people of Ukraine. The humanitarian crisis, Mr. Speaker, is worsening hour by hour. Can my right honourable friend assure my constituents in Penrith and the Border and people across the UK that the UK is doing everything it can, cross-government, to widen and accelerate the visa system, cut through the red tape, and work practically and compassionately with our partners in Europe to offer sanctuary and aid to as many Ukrainian people as we can and as quickly as we can?
I think the honourable member would have heard my answer to my Scottish National colleague on the other side of the House. I think what I would say is absolutely the Minister of the Armed Forces will be happy to brief you once those meetings have taken place to update you on the assistance the MOD can give.
Direct way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first say to the Secretary of State, thank him for the regular and excellent updates and briefings we have, and also thank him for the hard work he's putting in within the constraints he has to work within to Ukraine. However, can I say to him that I do think it's a strategic mistake that when confronting a tyrant, we actually tell him what we won't do. Now, if Putin remains in power, it's my view that we will have to confront him at some point militarily, and we should be aware of that and get that out in the open, I think. But my question is this, is what level of slaughter of Ukrainians are we willing to see before NATO and the West intervenes militarily in Ukraine, such as, for instance, ensuring safe areas in western Ukraine? Yeah, good question.
No answer. Okay. Look, I'm grateful to that honourable gentleman. Look, it is a difficult balance about when we tell people. I have to come to this House effectively to get policy permission from you before we take a different step in the weapons systems. And I think that is the right thing to do. We have to make sure it's calibrated into the right process. And I think it is important with Putin, especially as he would seek to discover things and use potentially to escalate, that we are upfront and transparent about what we're going to do. So he cannot come and try and repackage it as something, a major strategic issue. It's not an easy line. On the one hand, I would be quite happy to sometimes do this, but I think the decision about bringing the House with us on this and making sure people understand, I don't think it will be a tactical difference on the ground that I've come to the House today to tell people in advance that this is happening. Russia now has a serious problem with the international community's donations. They are at a large scale, whether they're anti-tank or Stinger missiles, that has had to change their tactics as a result. So I think it would be wrong for him to characterise this as anything other than us responding to their change in tactics, but making sure he doesn't get impunity to bomb people from the air and kill innocent victims. On the other issue around areas like humanitarian corridors and indeed no-fly zones, we just have to be careful. You have to enforce them. And in thinking about enforcing them, you have to recognise the knock-on effects of whether you trigger a wider war in Europe.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Defence Secretary and all the ministerial team working so hard on this, and all those in main building and those in uniform throughout our armed forces responding so well to the war in Ukraine. He mentions just over 3,600 new light anti-tank weapons. They've been put to very good use, as the Defence Secretary will know. Can he reassure the House that that supply will continue and at pace? And secondly, he mentions about consideration of the surface-to-air missiles, the system's Starstreak. How long will that decision-making process take?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. First of all, the decision has been made as a sense in principle. That's why I came to the House, that we will provide them. What we've got to make sure is we provide them with the training and the capability to deliver that. Can I just thank my right honourable friend for the effort he put in to work with the Speaker to deliver the speech yesterday by President Zelensky. I cannot tell you, between the two of you, Mr. Speaker, Regan, and others, I think how important it was to hear from a man who is clearly leading his country from the front, but is also under tremendous personal threat from Russia.
Leila Moran.
Mr. Speaker, can I first say thank you to the Defence Secretary for the approach he takes, for being the calm voice of competence that we want to hear in this crisis. He shouldn't have to intervene in the Home Office. I'm glad he is, though, and I thank him also for stepping up where his colleagues are failing again. He will know that this is not just the right thing to do, it is strategically the important thing to do, because Putin is counting on Europe not getting the refugee crisis right, because that plays into his hands in the medium and longer term. Would he agree with my concern that if we don't get a grip on the refugee crisis soon across the whole of Europe, including in this country, then we could well be playing into those fears?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her comments. Look, one of the most important things is recognising that President Putin, and as we saw the President of Belarus, used migrant flows deliberately to divide and put pressure on our system. It's why when they did that in Belarus, literally shoving people through fences is what the Belarusians did a few months ago. We sent 100 Royal Engineers to assist the Poles to manage that issue. And I think it is incredibly important that we all think about what happens. Many of us who were warning about what Russia was going to do warned a number of countries, and actually, in fact, requested to the European... I said to the European Union, where you can add value is to plan for mass refugees in a way that we have not seen since the war. That's really important. That's where the European Union is at its best in coordinating the non-military responses. I think they've done well, but they're not the only ones who are not, they're not shielded from the criticism as well. I think we all have to do it internationally. We have to do it better. We have to do the visa a bit faster. My colleagues are absolutely coming to bear to bring those assets from MOD, but we also should remember we act as a team. I'm not intervening in the Home Office. Government is a team, and we're working together as a team to deliver that.
Blake Drummond.
Although Putin has committed virtually all his forces he had pre-positioned, we know he has more modern equipment still to deploy. Are we able to determine whether those additional forces are ready to deploy?
Honourable friend, so first of all, he has deployed some of his most modern equipment. He has gone all in, I think, as people would say, and played his full hand. You will have seen only recently a SA-22 or a Panaster anti-air medium-range missile system that has been defeated by the mud of Ukraine with a burst tyre and it's stuck in the mud. So he has absolutely managed to, he's gone all in, he's risked some of his most important equipment, he's using significant numbers of his missile stocks, and he is taking huge risk around the wider boundaries of Russia that he is now leaving effectively thinned out from defence.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was a report on Reuters yesterday that dozens of former paras have signed up for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and that hundreds more are expected to do so. Could he give the House absolute clarity on the UK's government position in relation to those volunteers?
So the government's position is if you are a serving member of the armed forces, you will be breaking the law. I'm anticipating that there were reports in the weekend newspaper about, I think, 3 members who had gone AWOL over the weekend. They will be breaking the law and they will be prosecuted when they return for going absent without leave or deserting. For others, as the government's travel advice is don't go to Ukraine, we strongly discourage them from joining these forces. My experience, having been security minister, is people who went off to join the YPG and other organisations, it didn't end well. It is also the case, as a number of them are now discovering, that the Ukrainians are very clear. You turn up, you're in it for the whole game. You're not in it for a selfie in 6 weeks. You are in it for real. And I think we have seen already some people at the border decide that maybe not be the right option to follow.
Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that it will be possible at very short notice to reopen Manston Airport in Kent, to fly out humanitarian aid such as pharmaceuticals, and to fly in refugees who can then be processed at Manston Barracks. That will require the cooperation and the effort of the Ministry of Defence, as well as the cooperation of the Department for Levelling Up. I'm not asking for a guarantee now, but would my right honourable friend speak with our right honourable friend, the member for Surrey Heath, to see what possibilities there might be there?
I'm grateful for the right honourable friend's question. Look, at the moment we have the capacity we need and we have the landing slots and the landing fields we need to deliver whatever we need to do. If, however, there is greater pressure, I'll be absolutely delighted to talk to both him and my colleague for Surrey Heath to see whether we can take advantage of his kind offer.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, and again my thanks to the Defence Secretary for all he's doing in the compassionate way that he's doing it. Again, my question relates to a constituent and is not necessarily his departmental area, but I'd be grateful if he could follow it up. My constituent who lives in the Donbass 4 weeks ago, drove across the country, managed to get through to Poland and has been waiting for a visa for his wife and their infant daughter for the last 4 weeks. He has heard nothing from the Home Office. He's running out of money and wants to get home with his family. Please can he urge the Home Office to do their job?
If the Honourable Lady gives the details to my PPS, I'll be happy to make that representation to the Home Office.
Well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House again to keep us informed. And he was right when he said at the beginning that the whole House was moved by the address from the President of Ukraine yesterday. The President of Ukraine has spoken again today and is desperate for aircraft to protect women and children from being bombed and killed by Russians. Poland has acted, but there is a hold-up because of the response from the United States. The Secretary of State did touch on this before, but could he be clear that he supports what Poland is doing, and could he put pressure on America to support that action?
Look, I think what I would say is 2 things to my right honourable friend. Is first of all, look, I support the steps to allow Ukraine to continue to fly in its own airspace, its sovereign airspace, to deliver effect, military effect against those massive amounts of Russian artillery that are indiscriminately killing and bombing around the country, and I think that's incredibly important. It's one of the reasons why the no-fly zone is a problem, because both sides don't fly. We need to protect anti-air capability off Ukraine. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, what is the most appropriate tools? Obviously, the Ukrainians know, they have said what they wish. I think we have acted on when they've asked us, and that's why the new missiles we're talking about today are coming forward. Look, it is a matter for Poland. I said I will support whatever their choice is. In the meantime, we will continue to try and meet the outcomes that Ukraine wants with whatever methods we can.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rather than getting to the stage where we might need to rely on MOD assistance to get refugees here, I'm sure the Secretary of State would agree it's better to get people back here to the UK while they can. Same with humanitarian aid. We've got the bizarre situation where there's people that's displaced in Ukraine might come to rely or need to use humanitarian aid, but yet they could already be here in the UK where they've got family members. So if the UK is not going to lift the visa requirements for Ukrainians coming here, surely with the existing scheme where it applies to family members of British and Ukrainians already live in the UK, we can use the information we've got here, bring the people here, and then process and do security checks while they're here safely in the UK, rather than wasting resources in Ukraine to be better deployed elsewhere.
I think it is possible to do both, Donald John. I think you can process them very quickly out there, and the key here is well, that's what we're going to try and fix this afternoon.
John Whitty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago, I visited Mariupol with my right honourable friend's predecessor, Michael Fallon, and we heard the appreciation of the Ukrainian armed forces of the help that we were already giving them then through Operation Orbital. Can I therefore strongly welcome the announcement that my right honourable friend has made this afternoon, and does he agree with the Secretary-General of NATO that the sight of bodies lying on the streets unburied in Mariupol is credible evidence that Russia is guilty of war crimes?
Recording them. Well, first of all, I think, as I previously reported, the ICC have opened a campaign, and a number of countries, including Britain, are collecting evidence. Canada is taking quite a strong lead, and I think it's important that we follow the evidence. I think the open source reports of both civilian bodies and actually abandoned Russian dead by their own forces is a crime in itself. I mean, what a disgrace that the Russian generals have abandoned those young men to be murdered. Not murdered, to be killed, sorry, not murdered, but have been killed. That's the leadership of the Russian army that deserves to be in court for betraying their own soldiers, and at the same time for what they're doing to civilians of Ukraine. They are criminally responsible, and I hope they face justice.
John Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for updating us on the actions of the UK in support of the Ukrainians' heroic defence of their country. He will have noted that his update was much more warmly received than that of the Home Office yesterday, and with good reason, and I do hope Home Office ministers have noted that as well. We must act on all fronts. The need for humanitarian assistance is overwhelming. Could he say a little bit more about the 1,000 UK troops who are on standby? I understand from his statement they are still on standby to provide humanitarian assistance, where they are and the circumstances under which they will be deployed.
So, to answer the Honourable Lady's gentleman, first of all, we haven't yet had any requests for humanitarian support from neighbouring countries. As soon as they do, we will be very happy to deploy those troops to help in that process. We've got a meeting, obviously, next week in NATO, and maybe those things will come to a fore then, but that's what they're there for. They're earmarked to do exactly that. Just on her point at the Home Office, having been a Home Office Minister, having sat in opposition across Home Secretaries from the Labour Party, it is never an easy job in the Home Office. It is never a popular brief, and questions are never kind.
Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Could I please thank the Secretary of State for his bold and forthright leadership, and also pay tribute to all those in the MOD, FCDO and beyond who are burning the midnight oil. I consider the level of operational detail in his statement to be unprecedented as well, so I'm grateful. The Secretary of State will know the importance of close air support in a tactical environment. Could I please ask him what's been done to specifically support the Ukrainian Air Force?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Well, first of all, the HVM to assist them to fly freely in the airspace. Also, one of the ways they're delivering close air support, or actually fires in depth, is through the Turkish TB2 UAVs, which are delivering munitions onto their artillery and indeed their supply lines, which are incredibly important, in order to slow down or block the Russian advance.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement, for his clear commitment to military equipment that has been given and donated and given to the Ukrainians, also especially for the Star Streak anti-air missiles as well, which will down even more Russian aeroplanes and helicopters. We look forward to that. Can I ask the Secretary of State this question? In terms of support for Odessa, the last Ukrainian port that is open to Ukrainians to use, and they severely damaged one of the Russian ships just this week. Can I outline what naval support and capability is available for what is undoubtedly the next step in the Russian war of aggression to keep that last Ukrainian port open?
So the honourable gentleman makes an important point about the southern flank, the one area where the Russians had made advances in the south, obviously using Crimea, which they illegally annexed in 2014. That part of the sea around both Odessa and elsewhere is heavily mined, which has helped Ukraine defend its coastline, and in fact the media reporting of that ship that was hit, we can assume is made by a mine, but is unverified as well. Of course, the Russian Navy is blockading those ports, and that is gives limited capability to the Ukrainians to take those ships on. If there are ways we can help them do that, we will explore it.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have huge respect for my right honourable friend and his team for the way you've conducted this awful situation. Understandably, my Polish constituents are incredibly worried because of Putin's expansionism and the threat to Poland. And I have, I hope my right honourable friend will agree with me, the huge humanitarian effort from Poland with supporting hundreds of thousands of refugees and their proposed military support. So will my right honourable friend continue to ensure that Britain throws a protective arm around Poland, given the risks that plucky country is facing? And just finally, will he, if Putin does start to carpet bomb across Ukraine, will he and NATO reconsider the issue of the no-fly zone? I understand the position he comes from, though, as he set out earlier.
Just on the no-fly zone, I think we've set out our position. I'm not going to go into hypotheticals, what-ifs, but nevertheless, at the moment, the balance is I don't think it suits actually the Ukrainian disposition, given the amounts of heavy armour and missiles in the Russian stocks. And I think, if you had a no-fly zone, the Russians have a massive advantage with shells and missiles, and they would not stop in a no-fly zone, whereas the few things the Ukrainians have to reach the Russians at depth are in the air, and I think you would actually hamper one. On the resilience and support to Poland, we put 150 soldiers out there, 100 soldiers when the Belarusian migrant crisis was happening. We've got nearly 700 soldiers there now, helping them both in resilience and indeed, if we need, for humanitarian issues. I have spoken to my Polish counterpart yesterday. I'm hoping to visit next week. We will also look at air defence requests from them to protect their airfields. They are an ally for over 150 years. We stand absolutely by Poland, shoulder to shoulder. And I think it's really important, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to military requests, that we are putting it where it makes a difference and putting it where Sir wants it. There's a danger often in these events that we spread our forces all round for reassurances, but not necessarily to achieve the military tasks that we need to do.
Thank you, Speaker. I too want to thank the Secretary of State for Defence. It's now very clear that we need to recontain Russia, and that is going to mean resupplying Ukrainian forces, refortifying our front line, but crucially it's going to mean repressing the Russian economy. Now, at the moment, nobody can recognise the 275 figure that is being used for the number of sanctions that have been issued. The Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday heard evidence that the government simply was not ready. And even today, the family of the founder of the Wagner Group have still not been sanctioned here, even though they've been sanctioned in Europe. So when the Secretary of State sees the Foreign Secretary later today, could he ask her to get her act together?
I'd have to have pretty wide eyesight. She's in Washington at the moment. But if I were to, I had some massive binoculars, I would definitely pass it on. Look, I'm happy to try and get to the bottom of all the figures, both the amount of money that has been sanctioned. The statistics I had is that the UK have frozen more funds in London than Europe and the United States completely, and I think that matters. The construct of sanctions are all different in different countries, but I'd be very happy to look into that. And look, I don't think there should be any hiding place, and nor does the Foreign Secretary, for any of these Moscow hoods that are running around, including the dreadful Wagner Group.
John Barron.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Speaker. In commending the government for its robust response to this dreadful invasion, and notwithstanding existing levels of support and our Article 5 commitment to NATO, the government is right to rule out a no-fly zone, and also to emphasise it's a difficult balance to ensure that any defensive support is calibrated not to escalate matters to a strategic level. With that in mind, talk of Polish jets being donated, what assurances can my right honourable friend give that this will indeed, whatever the outcome, achieve the right balance, because a wider war would not serve the interests of any population, let alone Ukraine?
Secretary of State.
My right honourable friend makes some wise observations, but just on the jet issue and all lethal aid issue, it is, in a sense, unique for each individual country to make the choice it has to make. It is. You know, I have the duty of defending this wonderful nation, and it is those people I have to answer for, and we have to calibrate it as suits. And if the Polish government feels the security threat is so acute that it requires itself to do that, then I would fully understand their decision and stand by them. Remember, the countries that will face the direct consequence of a successful Russia in Ukraine are the bordering countries, because we know in Putin's mind some of those aren't, in his ideas, genuine countries, and some of those countries are the very countries that he historically feels should either be punished or indeed should be coerced into his way of thinking.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. In echoing the thanks to the Secretary of State and his team, could he pass on the House's thanks to all of his teams who are making this happen? On the Polish jets issue, it is of course a matter for Poland. But given that we've given man-pads and anti-tank weapons, would he regard the gift of aircraft as a defensive system, which is the word he has used in his statement?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think it depends how you use those aircraft. If you are close air support to Kyiv, then it's obviously defensive. If you are seeking to enter another sovereign's territory like Russian Air Force, then it is not. And I think that is important to recognise. But I'm afraid, as I said, I think it's a deeply bilateral decision for those countries. But as a friend and ally of Poland, we would stand by their decision.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
He was warning for months precisely what was coming. Why didn't we use the time that he gave us to forward deploy resources to deal with the inevitable flow of applications from refugees that was coming?
Secretary of State.
Quite know how to answer that question. Look, I think the importance is we're going to fix the here and now.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How much of the MOD spending in response to the crisis is going to be accounted for as ODA? What impact has the government's decision to slash the aid budget and abolish DFID had on its ability to coordinate the humanitarian response?
Secretary of State.
I'm not sure the government's decision to abolish DFID affected President Putin's judgment one bit.
Tim Lawson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I applaud the personal lead being taken by my right honourable friend and the strong role of the MOD and our forces. The Home Affairs Select Committee this morning took worrying evidence from the Ukrainian ambassador and Ukrainian support groups. Can I make two requests from that? Firstly, there are reports that there are many thousands of Ukrainian children unaccompanied across the border who've been taken there for safety, and that number is growing. Can he make the offer that when the welcome humanitarian and military supplies go in military planes, he includes personnel from SAFA, the largest employer of social workers, to help with the safeguarding worries that are now carrying on the border, and preferably bring them back to the UK and do the checks that may need to be done in the UK, where you don't need to change the law to grant them a 6-month visitor visa at the very least. And secondly, my Ukrainian constituents tell me that their friends in Ukraine are ordering over the internet body armour from British companies because they are desperately short for their reserve and volunteer forces. We need to do more to help equip those people who have bravely gone to the front line and weren't part of the standing military and don't have the sort of kit that we would expect.
Secretary of State.
On the last point, included in the increased package is more body armour alongside many of the countries that donated in the conference in February. Madam Speaker, I'm slightly in danger of entering into Home Office questions here. I know they were yesterday. While I was a Home Office Minister, one of the greatest delights was not being the Immigration Minister, but rather the Security Minister. So all I would say is I understand the feeling in the House, so does the Home Secretary, so does the Prime Minister, and we are working to resolve that speed as quick as possible. As for the internal details of different immigration schemes, I would gently refer my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, to the Home Office.
I will protect the Secretary of State from the temptation to stray out with his own territory. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I give my thanks to the Defence Secretary for his work, that of his team, and for his compassion. I'm afraid I am going to raise another visa issue with him. My constituent is trying to get his young niece to the UK after she fled her home in Ukraine. After endless bureaucratic checks and delays, they've been told today she has to travel nearly 300 kilometres across Poland to get the decision on her visa. The Defence Secretary will understand that refugees like my constituent's niece have already made long and challenging journeys from Ukraine to Poland, now more journeys just to get the decision. My constituent calls the government's approach to people fleeing the war in Ukraine inhumane. Given the meeting on the visa process he mentioned, can he press on the Home Secretary the need to offer a compassionate and human response to refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at the risk of your anger, I will be delighted to pass that case to my private parliamentary secretary and press on the Home Office to resolve it. If I indulge myself, then I think Madam Deputy Speaker will rule me out, because this is a question about the Ukraine situation through defence.
No, the Secretary of State is steering a careful and a wise course, and I will endeavour to help him in doing so, but it is the case that, of course, the government is acting as one, and we all recognise that. Thank you. Where am I? Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Putin was clearly counting on a quick victory. So I congratulate my right honourable friend not only for his statement, but the far-sighted view of training Ukrainian troops and indeed supplying defensive weapons. What assessment has he made of the effectiveness of both that training and the defensive weapons in theatre, which of course can never be tested other than in theatre?
Secretary of State.
But I think there are two parts, my honourable friend. One is going to be the lessons learned, whatever happens, that we need to learn for our own defences and our own capabilities. I think it is absolutely the case that one of the other assumptions President Putin made was that the Russian army was invincible, and that for all the money they spent, it didn't really matter about the people in them, and it didn't matter about battle preparation and all the things you do to prepare people to go to war. They didn't do that. Some of these so-called invincible weapons are now being taken apart by handheld weapons, some of which are supplied by Britain. I think it's something, it's not something to gloat about. This is, in the end, about the loss of human life, but it is absolutely something to be proud that Britain followed up its determination to stand up for its values and its allies by supporting them with hard power as well as soft.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think in terms of the military response, the Secretary of State can and must be commended wholeheartedly. However, I don't necessarily share his enthusiasm for the government's humanitarian response. Indeed, I spoke with my constituent Maria this morning, whose family in Poland can't even get clarity from the Home Office as to whether they should continue with pre-existing visitor visas or indeed go for a family visa. Quite simply, it is a shambles. So when he meets with the Home Office this afternoon, can I ask the Secretary of State for Defence, for want of a better phrase, whether he will stick a rocket right up the Home Office?
Yeah. Secretary of State.
I think just on the immigration pathway, first of all, the overall number of 200,000 for family and uncapped for humanitarian is a good thing. The fact Britain is the biggest single donor to the humanitarian aid is a good thing, and we shouldn't underplay those two facts. I understand the frustration with both Ukrainians trying to flee and with members of this House about the speed of that processing. I said yesterday the MOD will support the Home Office as requested. In principle, they have agreed. We've now got a work on today to make that go quicker.
Andrew Murison.
Exercise cold response and reinforcing Tapper camp are very welcome, and they will reassure our Scandinavian and our Baltic colleagues. But what is being done specifically with Lithuania, which is very much at risk, since Putin's next move might very well be an attempt to link Russia proper with the Kaliningrad Oblast?
My right honourable friend raises a really important point, and it's that point about why these countries must take some of their decisions bilaterally, because they will face the consequence of a successful Russia in Ukraine and what will happen next. And that's why we pay extra attention to the Baltics. The right honourable gentleman, the front bench spokesman for defence, is going today to Estonia. I was happy to facilitate that, and I will also the SNP if they wish to visit. It's important that we work through the Balts together. There are 4, I think, enhanced forward battle groups there, and they've got to make sure they are well coordinated. For a time we put some of our Apaches through Lithuania, but as he rightly points out, we're acutely aware of, I think, the area called the Suwalki Gap, which is the gap between Belarus and indeed Kaliningrad, which could be exploited for Russia's purposes.
Ben Bradshaw.
At risk of destroying the Defence Secretary's career, the reason he's getting all these questions on refugees is because honourable members on both sides of this House wish he were in charge of the Home Office. But leading on from the question of my honourable friend, the member for Halton, how confident can he be that if we don't confront Putin more directly now in Ukraine, we're going to have to next month, next year, somewhere else in Europe?
I think that is, I'm afraid, the $60 million question, and I think we have to all be mature about how we work that out through analysis, through talking to people that understand it. There is no easy answer. Is he acting irrationally? Yes, he is. Why would he have done this? Is he acting out of an ambition far beyond his perceived threat of NATO? Yes, he is. He's written that himself, and he's made speeches about it. Does he take a view that there are a number of countries in NATO that don't really belong in NATO? Yes, he does. That's very dangerous for the West. That's why I say, and I say with all passion, that we have to work at making sure we keep our alliances completely strong. That is the thing that makes a difference to him, plus the economic sanctions, plus the fact that his legacy now is he is done. If he has any mistakes, Madam Deputy Speaker, if he's going to make a mistake, it is to present that somehow he can survive this in his political reputation. If he wanted to further Russia, he's damaged Russia and sent it backwards. If he wants to further his case as a great leader, he is now contained in a cage of his own making.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to only briefly join the queue of those expressing our thanks that the Secretary of State and his department are now involved in trying to sort out a very sorry process in relation to visas, and I'll perhaps use the good offices that he suggested to take up a particular case. But may I return to the issue of evidence gathering of war crimes? Because isn't it important that in terms of future deterrence, not just to Putin, but of the rest of his regime, it's very clear that we are deadly serious about the gathering of war crimes. It may take many years before we're ever in a position to prosecute them. It may be necessary to look, as has been suggested by some, at a dedicated international criminal tribunal to deal with jurisdictional issues. But will you agree with me? It's important that we send the message that we're not going away on this. We will amass the evidence, and for however long it takes, we will pursue them, not just Putin, but right the way down the chain of command for those who are responsible, because when his regime falls, like Milosevic's, it will, then the democracies of the world are coming for him.
I agree with my right honourable friend 100%, and my honourable friend, the Minister of the Armed Forces, met with the ICRC only last week, I think, to discuss exactly that. It is absolutely right. They know that the long arm of justice will follow them forever. And he also says something that's really important. This cannot be swept away by just one man in the Kremlin. Right down through the chain of command, right now, those commanders sending those young men to their deaths, they also need to face justice, military or international.
Matt Rodder.
Could I ask the Secretary of State, could I thank the Secretary of State for the calm and professional approach he's taken to this very difficult issue. Also thank him for the pressure he's applying to the Home Office to, quite rightly, speed up the fair treatment of refugees. Could he also speak to other government departments about the lengthy delays which some medical convoys are facing? I've had approaches from my local Ukrainian community, and I understand other members from across the House have faced this difficulty, and there does seem to be a genuine issue of red tape created by customs declarations. If he could raise that with other government departments, that would be a huge step forward.
Look, I'm absolutely delighted to do that. If he wants to give me that, I'll ask from this questions to investigate what more we can do. We have helped the Department of Health with some of its medical supplies fly in, but I also know there are lots of people driving out with it. So if the customs are on our side, we can do something about it. If they're not, I'll raise it with my international counterparts.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend may be aware of both the reporting and indeed extraordinarily the opinion polls coming out of Ukraine that show that the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine regard the United Kingdom as foremost amongst their friends in Western Europe. And that is in no small part due to his leadership and his foresight, as others have said. Not only have we've supplied them 2,000 anti-tank missiles before the invasion, I welcome what he said in the statement today about what we're doing today. Can he assure me that all future requests for further defensive military equipment by Ukraine will be met in the same way?
Secretary of State.
We'll look at every request quickly and genuinely and do whatever we can to help Ukraine. And I just thank him for his kind comments. But look, I think it's just actually what Britain stands for. You know, whether I work with Sweden and Finland, non-NATO countries, or whether you work with aspirant NATO countries or indeed countries who want to belong to our values, there's something that they all value, and that is what Britain stands for and her history.
Paul Bristow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russia's advance has been hamstrung by logistical difficulties, defections and now freezing temperatures, with the convoy advancing on Ukraine essentially immobile for the past few days. Does my right honourable friend agree that President Putin has badly misjudged the effectiveness of his own military and the resistance of the Ukrainians, who have been backed up by Western military aid and training?
Secretary of State.
Look, I think there are two major miscalculations by President Putin, and they are that first of all, that his military was invincible, and secondly, that the Ukrainian people would welcome him. I think his other major miscalculation was that somehow the international community was not united. He's wrong on that.
Clive Afford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Members from both sides of the House will wish him well with his discussions with the Home Office. It's a hard nut to crack. I spoke with a constituent of mine over the weekend whose family in Irpin. And when she asked me about a no-fly zone, I explained the situation to her. And I have to say the words came very difficultly, because with some difficulty, because when you're facing someone who has a family in a war zone, it is very difficult to explain why you can't intervene, as much as I support the position that we're taking. She then responded by saying we need to be able to defend ourselves, and that they want access to more weaponry that we can supply to them. And I know he's providing Starstreak high-velocity anti-air missiles, and that he hopes that that will be within the definition of defensive weapons. But that definition is in itself, is that a difficulty in providing the support that people from Ukraine are asking for? And is that something that's going to have to be kept under review?
I think it's always kept under review, depending on the actions of President Putin. I winced when you said the town of Ypres, because they are under daily artillery and missile bombardment, being literally flattened by the Russian forces. And I can only pass on my support and hope for your constituent that she gets through this, and we will do everything we can. I think when I speak to Ukrainians, it's really about the outcomes they want. They don't want to be bombed. They don't want to be shelled. They want to be able to patrol their own skies. We think there are other ways of doing that at the moment without risking a wider war in Europe, and that's why we think it is really important. Some of the mass devastation we see comes from artillery and missiles rather than the air, and I think that's why we need to find other ways of dealing with that.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Providing the Starstreak anti-air missiles will help Ukraine defend itself, and so is very welcome. But given the situation on the ground and the practical difficulties, will he look creatively at ways to deliver that training so this capability can be used by those brave Ukrainian forces?
Secretary of State.
Yes, we're looking at that at pace.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the very strong condemnation by the Defence Secretary of, in his words, the indiscriminate and murderous attacks on civilian areas. Can I ask him what the UK government's position will be next month on the UN-backed political declaration on restricting the use of wide-area effect explosive weapons in populated areas?
Secretary of State.
Can I write to her, because it will be a Foreign Office lead? I understand the debate that is progressing next month. Okay.
And finally, Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and also the daily update briefings, which are excellent. With Russia repeating false allegations of the US supporting a Ukrainian military biological programme that would release deadly pathogens like the plague and anthrax, what new steps are the MOD and other government agencies taking to effectively tackle dissemination of false information like this?
So the Honourable Lady makes a really important point that Russia has not given up on its false flag. It hasn't given up on its false narrative. In fact, it has shut nearly every avenue of information in Russia down on its people, which again I think shows the fear they are under. I think only yesterday they stopped TikTok in their country. We have to absolutely challenge, and we do challenge the false flags. As the Honourable Lady has seen, we call it out publicly. At some stages we did it by declassifying intelligence early on, which is not normally what we do. But also we should be genuinely worried when the false flags drop breadcrumbs toward chemical weapons or nerve agents or biological weapons. We should worry about that because we all worry what's behind that in the first place.
Yes. Thank you. I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House to keep us updated and for his thorough answers to a very large number of questions. We now move on to the next statement. I will allow people to leave quietly and take their places quickly. Thank you. We come to the statement by the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I just want to start by saying what a privilege it was for all of us to hear the historic address in the House yesterday by President Zelensky. I'm sure all members will join me in thanking him once again for his inspiring words, his great leadership. And it is with those words in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we come, or certainly I come here today. With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the UK phase-out of imports of Russian oil in response to Vladimir Putin's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. The UK joins key allies, including the United States, in halting the import of Russian oil, which makes up 44% of Russian exports and 17% of the government's revenue through taxation. This action follows the most punishing set of sanctions that the British state has ever imposed on a G20 nation. Our trade, financial and personal sanctions are having an effect on the Russian economy. The ruble, as I speak, has now fallen by nearly 42%, and the Moscow exchange's stock trading has been shut since the 25th of February. The British government has sent a clear message to Putin's regime and to those who support him in his war against Ukraine. It is important to remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Russia produces only a fraction of the fuel products currently imported to the UK. In a competitive global market for oil and petroleum products, demand can be met by alternative sources of supply. And as a result of international revulsion at Putin's invasion, Russian oil is already being excluded from much of the market, and currently it is trading at quite a sharp discount from other crude oil sources. But we want to go further, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday I set out that the UK is phasing out imports of Russian oil during the course of the year. This transition will give the market, it will give businesses and supply chains more than enough time to substitute Russian imports. Businesses should use this year to ensure as smooth a transition as possible so that consumers will not be affected. The government will work with companies through a new task force on oil to support them to make use of this period in finding alternative supplies. Yesterday, I spoke with businesses, unions and representatives from the sector, and of course, I and officials in BEIS will continue to engage and support British business. While Russian imports account for 8% of total UK oil demand, the UK is also, one should remember, a significant producer of both crude oil and petroleum products. We participate in a global market for these products, and we have resources in place in the unlikely event of supply disruption. Over the course of the year, the task force we set up will work closely with international partners, including the USA, the Netherlands, and the Gulf, to ensure alternative supplies of fuel products. Last week, I addressed the International Energy Agency, and tomorrow we will have an extraordinary meeting of the G7 energy ministers to discuss further steps. While businesses should do everything they can to source oil from alternative sources, they will still be able, it's important to emphasize this, they will still be able to import Russian oil during this transition period. These measures target oil-related products imports only. The UK is not dependent on Russian natural gas, making up less than 4% of our supply. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will be exploring options to end this altogether. I want to make clear to the House that we fully intend and we must end our dependency on all Russian hydrocarbons. In the meantime, we need more investment in North Sea oil and gas production as we make the move to cheaper and cleaner power. Turning off domestic production, as some are calling for at this moment, would be completely the wrong thing to do. We're not going to do it. The Prime Minister has also confirmed that the government will set out an energy strategy to explain the UK's long-term plans for greater energy security, including both renewable and nuclear power, building on our 10-point plan. This measure and those being taken by our allies in terms of the phase-out, the oil phase-out, will move the West away from a dependency on Russian oil. It will take us on a road to building a stronger, more resilient British energy system. It will also increase the growing pressure on Russia's economy and will ultimately hamper Russia's ability to impose further misery on the Ukrainian people.
Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by thanking the Secretary of State for his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are united against Russian aggression. We stand together in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and let me echo the admiration he expressed for President Zelensky and his address to us yesterday. His bravery and eloquence was both extraordinary and inspiring. On the Secretary of State's immediate decisions, we know that Putin's war machine is being funded by oil and gas. That's why it's right for every country to do what it can to isolate the regime and every company to do so. So we fully support the government's decision to ban oil imports. It is a right and welcome step. And it is right also to work with the companies and unions on how we implement this policy. I'd like to ask the Secretary of State in his reply, maybe he could tell us what assessment he has made of the impact of the ban on petrol and diesel prices. We also support him in his decision to seek to find ways to rid ourselves of Russian gas imports. And I want to ask him about the wider energy security context to his statement, which he talked about. But I think it's essential that we learn the right lessons from this crisis. Although 50% of our gas comes from the North Sea and only 4% from Russia, we pay the same price for our own gas as that which we import because we operate in an integrated gas market. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are absolutely exposed to the rocketing wholesale gas prices that we are seeing, currently up 100% on the month and 800% on the year. The right lesson to learn is therefore surely that we have to go much further and much faster in developing homegrown zero-carbon power, including renewables and nuclear, which can free us from the whims of autocrats and dictators who can use fossil fuels as a geopolitical weapon. Does the Secretary of State agree this is the right lesson and that policy will need to change? In particular, does he agree we should finally end the effective moratorium on onshore wind in the planning regulations, which has denied us power each and every year since 2015, equivalent to our gas imports from Russia? Does he agree we should ramp up our offshore wind so we go well beyond 40 gigawatts? And does he agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's time to finally get serious about energy efficiency, the best way of cutting energy demand, and where the government has not succeeded in the past years? On the North Sea, Madam Deputy Speaker, there needs to be a phased transition, but will he now clarify the government's position on fracking, and will he confirm that the moratorium that was put in place will remain in place. No ifs, no buts. No ifs, no buts, as fracking would not make any difference to the prices consumers pay, is dangerous and would take decades to come on stream. They don't agree with me. I've got a position against fracking. They support fracking. We'd love to know what the Secretary of State and the government thinks, and I'm sure they would too. Finally, let me ask him about the cost of living crisis facing families arising from what is happening to oil and gas prices. We have consistently warned the government that their measures were wholly inadequate for the rise in energy bills. I asked the Secretary of State today, will he undertake to tell the Chancellor that in his spring statement he must come back with much, much more help for both families and businesses? Let me end by saying this, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are united in our support for people in Ukraine. We will support the government in everything it does, which can cut off support for the evil and barbaric Putin regime. And we urge the government to learn the right lessons from this crisis for our country so we can achieve both energy security and energy sovereignty.
State.
Deputy Speaker, in his customary way, he raised a large number of questions, the majority of which I hope to deal with. In terms of his words against Putin's barbaric invasion, his completely illegal actions, I'm very pleased that he's reflecting our sentiments, and we have a mutual interest in making sure that Putin fails. As far as the cost of living is concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was an extensive intervention by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I think it's quite wrong for opposition politicians to say that the price cap, which will be set in August, is going to necessarily be higher than what it is today. We simply don't know. He will understand that the price cap will be set at a time retrospectively looking at the average price. It may well be higher, but there are circumstances in which it won't be increasing as much as he imagines. And of course, as is always the case, we have an ongoing look at the price cap. We speak to Ofgem all the time, and Ofgem is engaging work in terms of how the price cap is calculated. In terms of the North Sea, I'm pleased to hear that he's very keen to support investment in the North Sea in terms of making sure that gas is a key transition fuel. That's something which I think many people on the benches opposite may disagree with. And of course, he's absolutely right to stress an increased focus on renewables and nuclear power. We are absolutely at one in our agreement on this.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today? I think we have to brace ourselves for the greatest impact on living standards that any of us have known in our lifetimes, and that does necessitate a more pragmatic approach to energy policy. It means accelerating investment in renewables, potentially lifting the effective moratorium on onshore wind. It means looking again at fracking, and it means taking all possible advantage we can from our domestic supplies within the North Sea as part of a transition. Would my right honourable friend agree with that, and also that it would be perverse and dangerous to take away oil from Russia and replace it with oil and gas from Iran and Venezuela, two regimes just as malign and dangerous as Putin's regime in Russia?
I thank my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, for his intervention. He's absolutely right. We've got to look at all the possible technologies that can give us as much resilience. We've got to actually, I think, shuffle off a lot of outdated dogma in this area, and I'm very pleased that the right honourable gentleman is full square behind nuclear, because as I remember when he was Secretary of State, he was not the most supportive of the nuclear industry. But my right honourable friend is quite right to identify potentially hostile powers, and we are absolutely willing we're very keen to diversify away from backing or providing resources to potentially hostile powers.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's safe to say that in this chamber we all broadly support the statement that the Secretary of State has made here today. And whilst there will be arguments about the potential speed of the transition, we cannot escape the sheer scale of what has been announced here. This is a seismic shift in UK, US and indeed European energy policy. However, we also can't be blind to the fact that there will be consequences to this. And one of those potential consequences is for retaliatory action from Putin himself. What consideration has the Secretary of State given to that matter? And on that specific point, of course, if there was to be gas and oil shortages on the European continent, as a producer of oil and gas, does this not emphasise the importance of Scotland's North Sea oil and gas reserves? And indeed, in terms of resources and Scotland's resources in particular, the renewable resources that Scotland has are enormous. 25% of the entirety of Europe's offshore wind capacity sits off the coast of Scotland. I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more from the Secretary of State in relation to renewables. So I would like to hear a little bit more from him in respect of the additional support that he intends to give to the likes of onshore and offshore wind, tidal, hydro pump storage, hydrogen, so on and so forth, and what the timescales behind those progresses will be. And of course, the second big consequence of this will be for consumers. We can't escape that fact. There will be inevitable price rises, irrespective of what the Secretary of State has intimated earlier in relation to the price cap. So on that specific point, will he commit to using every single penny of additional resource that comes from the North Sea oil and gas sector to insulate households from the looming cost of living crisis?
I was very determined not to inject any kind of partisan tone in these proceedings. But it did strike me as particularly bizarre hearing the honourable gentleman defend the North Sea transition deal and the considerable oil and gas assets in Scotland. I'd be very interested to hear what his Green counterparts in the coalition north of the border thought about his remarks. But in relation to protecting consumers, he will know that we are fully committed to the price cap, and that's something which we review all the time in terms of how effectively it can operate. And of course, we are 100% behind renewables. In relation to onshore wind, it's important to remind the House we lifted the ban on the Pot 1 auction last year, on the Pot 1 auction, which has had a huge boost for onshore wind.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? And I very much welcome the overall emphasis on, in the longer term, replacing fossil fuels with renewables. But can I just ask, does his department understand the urgency of the present short-term situation, not just for prices, but for security of supply? And will the government has announced support for households, but what about businesses? Businesses tend to buy on 6-month contracts, and his hope that the situation will rectify itself within a few months, I'm afraid, I think is hopeless naive. We are facing a crisis in energy bigger than the oil price shock of the 1970s that is likely to have as big an impact or bigger than on our economy than it did then. Is his department seriously engaged with this with the necessary urgency?
We absolutely engage with it. And as someone who is very interested in the 1970s, I mean, he will remember that the oil price quadrupled in 3 months. And we are facing a difficult time. I think that the department is fully aware of the urgency of the problem, but he will also appreciate that a lot of the investment that we needed to make simply wasn't made. We didn't make enough commitment to nuclear. This was a historic mistake of previous governments, but we're absolutely focusing on dealing with the problem in the here and now. And that's why my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and I are coming up with a plan in the next few days to track to reinforce. Well, I find it extraordinary that this gentleman, who was responsible for energy policy in the last Labour government, is smirking from a sitting position when he completely failed. He comprehensively failed the nuclear sector, completely failed on energy supply, completely failed on energy resilience, and we're still trying to clean up his mess. But, well, friend, we are working on these plans.
And I say we'll have no more interventions from a so-called sedentary position. Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. He will know that many local authorities, NHS trusts and other public bodies are locked into gas supply contracts with Gazprom. In order to get out of those, the government needs to bring forward legislation to amend the public procurement rules. Will he do so?
So the position with respect to Gazprom is that it is not, the UK company is separate from the parent, but of course, should anything happen to Gazprom, just as any other shipper or supplier of energy, we will take the appropriate steps if anything untoward should happen to that distributor and supplier.
Sir Desmond Swain.
When we sanction Russia, we also sanction ourselves. And we need to be clear with the British people that this is a sacrifice that we're expecting them to make when the Ukrainians are making so much greater sacrifice, don't we?
Right, honourable friend is absolutely right. People in this country have an intuitive, heartfelt feeling for the people of Ukraine, and they understand. People understand. I've seen this in my constituency in the weekend. I'm sure he's seen it in his constituency. People are willing to endure hardships in solidarity with the heroic efforts that the people of Ukraine are making. People understand this in this country because we're a generous and giving country.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government is right to get off Russian oil and gas. I welcome that, but wrong to propose replacing it with new domestic production. Our dependence on fossil fuels is what got us into this energy crisis in the first place. That's why many of us, including the International Energy Agency, are calling for no new licences. Because the real insanity is to try to get out of one crisis by plunging ourselves into another. More extraction from the North Sea will keep our bills high, will drive us past safe climate limits, and fracking will not help. So will he use this moment to launch an emergency green revolution? Will he get serious at last about energy efficiency? And will he wean the UK off not just Russian and oil, not just Russian oil and gas, but all oil and gas now?
So on this question, I have to confess, the Honourable Lady and myself have completely different views. We're diametrically opposed. I agree with her on the net zero commitment. But this idea that we can simply switch the lights off, so to speak, on oil and gas is absurd. It's completely absurd. And we need to have investment in the North Sea.
No, well, I think I said quite clearly, no more shouting when people are sitting down. Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend's statement and pay tribute to him and his predecessors for the diversification that they have made to the supply and security and sources of energy mix over recent years, in spite of the lack of investment in nuclear during the 2000s leading up to 2010. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that oil will remain a key source of energy for some time to come as we are transitioning? And therefore, what consideration has he brought about, or what consideration has he made to bringing about influence on OPEC nations to produce more oil so that the global supply can be better managed?
My right honourable friend raises a particularly important point. We had a discussion at the IEA Ministerial only last week where we all agreed as a collective to increase or to release our stock. And this was an American initiative which we supported. And clearly, we need to work as an international community to make sure that we can provide enough supply to dampen the increase in prices that we're seeing.
Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst I welcome the spirit of these plans, I urge the government to act even faster. Russian gas and oil constitutes just a tiny fraction of the UK's energy mix, and we must break this last lifeline to the Putin regime as soon as we can. I'm also deeply concerned to hear members opposite call for a resumption of fracking, which would be a betrayal of the commitments we made to the world in Glasgow just 5 months ago. Will the Secretary of State today commit to ruling out further investments in fossil fuels and instead pledge his department support for an ambitious new Green New Deal and wide-ranging investments in renewables, including the Mersey Tidal project, so that we can finally set ourselves on the path of true energy independence? Thank you.
So, I have to say, as Energy Minister and now Secretary of State, I've been totally committed to increasing the supply and production of renewable power. We reopened the Pot 1 auction for onshore wind. For the first time ever, we had a tidal stream, a pot, ring-fence for tidal stream technology. I've introduced an annual auction for offshore wind. So I'm completely with him, being 100% behind the renewables and the green revolution.
Andrew Boy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend not only for his statement today, but for his continued and unflinching support for the oil and gas industry that I am very proud to represent much of in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. And can I ask him on that, is it not absurd, despite the importance as being brought home to all of us through the tragic scenes that we're seeing on television right now of energy security, that it continues to be the Scottish Government's official position that we should have no new licences, no new exploration and no new drilling in the North Sea?
So my answer to my honourable friend is absolutely right. It was a North Sea transition deal. And transition is the key word. It's a North Sea transition deal, not the North Sea extinction deal, which the honourable member and his green friends north of the border are pursuing. We have a very, very different approach, I'm glad to say, from members of on the benches opposite, and long may that continue.
Dave Duggan.
Many thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Transition is the key word, and the Minister has just said that, and we need to pivot very quickly towards renewable energy. But this is a sharp reduction in oil and gas imports, 8% from Russia, and we welcome that. Insofar as that will lead to a net reduction in availability of oil and gas, it will also lead to a net reduction in emissions, which won't be maintained. We will need to supplement that demand in the short term. What discussions does he plan to have with Scottish Government to ensure that we can meet that with the maximum economic benefit to oil and gas services companies?
I'm very happy to speak to colleagues in the Scottish Government about these issues. And he should remember that, yes, we are banning the import, but it's a phasing out. We could have gone down the US route and had a 45-day grace period, but that would have been too disruptive to the supply chain. But I'd be very happy to talk to him and his Scottish Government colleagues about how we can manage that process. And that's exactly why, in the statement, I've also announced the formation of a task force to deal with that transition.
Richard Fuller.
Deputy Speaker, with regard to the UK's Russian oil ban, I am convinced of the moral case, although I am sceptical about the efficacy of such a ban in the long term. I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to keeping all options open, but he'll be aware that there is moving faster on transition to green puts greater costs on technology risk on households. So will he look again at options on insulating homes and government support for home insulation as part of the package?
My honourable friend, as other members across the House, is quite right to focus on energy efficiency, because clearly that's a big part of this conundrum. I think we've had some successes, but we've also done things not as effectively as we could have done. I mean, there were elements of the Green Homes Grant that worked, and there were elements that didn't work as well. And I'm constantly trying to improve the offer on the energy efficiency. It did with the public sector.
Carrie McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has been asked twice now, very specifically, about fracking, and has completely avoided answering the question. Would you like to have another go?
A go, and I will be very clear. I will, and actually, funnily enough, I was a minister at the time this written ministerial statement on fracking, hydraulic fracturing was made. The government has always been clear that we will take a precautionary approach and support shale gas exploration if it can be done in a safe and sustainable way. That remains our position, and we will be evidence-less. This is what we wrote and said in 2019, and we're still committed to that.
Rob Halfon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. In terms of oil prices, my right honourable friend will know that prices at the pumps are reaching £1.60 per litre for hard-pressed motorists. They're paying around £16 more than a year ago. Hauliers are paying more than £120 every time they fill up at the pumps, and this is literally unaffordable for most people around the country. I recognise the government have done a lot with fuel duty free. The Irish have announced today a rebate of 20 cents on petrol, 15 cents on diesel. We must do the same, and I know he's got to make the case to the Treasury, so you mustn't just fob me off. He's got to make the case. And will he just finally introduce Pump Watch, as recommended by Fairfuel UK, which will monitor prices from the big oil companies to make sure that motorists are not ripped off at the pumps when the oil price either rockets when the petrol pump price rockets when the oil price goes high and goes down like a feather when the oil price lowers.
There is no member, honourable or right honourable member in this House that has done more for the motorist over the last 12 years than my right honourable friend. And I completely hear him on his imprecation to the Treasury in terms of helping consumers. I think my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, did give a wide range of measures which offer some support, but we're always happy to talk to him to see how we can improve the offer.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, it's a great pity it's taken a war in Europe to show just how mad our energy policy is, but nevertheless I do welcome the comments by the Minister today when he has said that turning off domestic production of North Sea oil and gas would be completely insane right now. But would he agree that it would be equally insane to turn our back on the shale gas which is available in the north of England, which would help to make us less dependent upon foreign resources, which would create jobs, which would give us security of supply, which would give the Treasury revenue from gas? And does he agree with me that the decision by the Prime Minister not to have concreting over the wells which are already there is the first step to leading to the exploitation of that gas?
In conversation with my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, we were clear that it didn't necessarily make any sense to concrete over the wells. We're still in conversations about that. And as I've said, our position from the moratorium has always been the same. If it can be done in a safe and sustainable way, the government is open to the idea of fracking. We've always said this. This position has not changed. And with respect to the North Sea, I fully agree with everything he said.
Selene Saxby.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement this afternoon and for the work done by this Conservative government to increase our renewable energy capacity by 500%. And as we move towards the new normal of a greener and more secure energy supply, can I also ask if he will commit to increase the capacity coming out of the Celtic Sea and accelerate the rollout of floating offshore wind and the target that it can deliver?
I think floating offshore wind, as my honourable friend remarks, is key to actually accelerating our renewables offer. And I think that in the next few days we will hopefully be saying some slightly more ambitious targets in terms of our 2030 ambition than we have hitherto said.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the government's been in power for 12 years, why hasn't he already lifted the very damaging moratorium put in by David Cameron on onshore wind, the cheapest and quickest way of generating renewables? And when
sure, he will remember that there was a moratorium on the Pot 1 auction, which we lifted. We lifted that 2 years ago, and I'm very pleased to say that in the fourth auction round, we do have a separate pot which is ring-fenced for onshore and solar technologies, and onshore will be fully reflected in that auction.
Andrew Murison.
Deputy Speaker, the government's right to be cautious about windfall taxes, though it's worth remembering on this side that it was Baroness Thatcher that introduced them in 1981. Given the extraordinary profits by BP and Shell in particular in recent times, and given the very real prospect of simply unaffordable bills landing on our constituents' doormats in the very near future, will the government at least keep that option open?
My honourable friend is well versed in departmental responsibilities, and he will know that issues to do with taxation are squarely in the remit of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. I personally feel that a windfall tax is not the way to go in this particular moment, because there's huge uncertainty about investment in the North Sea as it is. And if we were to entertain the idea of a windfall tax, all that would do would be simply to frighten the investment, destroy jobs and destroy wealth creation. I don't think that's in anyone's interest.
Liz Savile-Roberts.
Putin's bloody war in the Ukraine is being financed by Europe's addiction to fossil fuels. We have to speed up our green transition. But more than 1 in 10 Welsh households are living in fuel poverty, and this number is growing daily. Starved of public transport investment, Wales is the most car-dependent nation in the UK. We will therefore be disproportionately affected by rising prices. Now, rural regions of Scotland and England with high levels of car dependency are eligible for the rural fuel duty relief. Will he extend it to Wales?
Even if I wanted to, it's not in my power to do so, but I'd be very happy to talk to people across the government to address the issue that she's raised.
John Lamont.
Very much. I very much welcome the government's statement today and the government's plans. However, is the government aware of current supply issues for red and white diesel? Businesses in the Scottish borders have contacted me in the last day or so to say that there's real issues with sourcing red and white diesel. So, indeed, suppliers are reporting that Grangemouth will run out in the coming days. Is the government aware of this, and will they investigate it further?
We will absolutely. I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friend, who's always been a consistent and extremely able defender of his constituents' interests. What I would say is that the red diesel phase-out was announced 2 years ago, and I'd be very happy to talk to him to see how we can actually manage that transition.
Mike King.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following on from the member for Harwich and North Essex, many businesses hedge their fuel costs going forward, like aviation, which impacts massively on my constituency. But many businesses are going to be hugely exposed because they haven't hedged those costs. Is the department doing some analysis of the exposure of these businesses?
The honourable gentleman raises a critically important point. The department is always looking, particularly at a time of extreme price volatility, at how these prices affect the supply chain and businesses. Indeed, my honourable friend, the member for North Derbyshire, was speaking to energy-intensive industries just this morning, as I was, and we're fully alive to their plight.
Lee Anderson.
Deputy Speaker, now then, I think we all welcome the banning of Russian oil and gas to put the squeeze on Putin. But what about Russian coal? We're currently importing over 500,000 tonnes a year of coking coal. It's the same type of coal, the metallurgical coal, that can be mined safely and cheaply in this country. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that if we can get it out of this ground cheaply and safely, then we should do it without delay?
He will know that the specific issue relating to the Cumbrian coking mine is under judicial review, but clearly we want to move away, as I said in my statement, from Russian hydrocarbons. That's absolutely our intention.
Vera Hobhouse.
Deputy Speaker, obviously the crisis makes us all very aware of consumer energy prices and how to contain them to some degree. To reduce the average energy cost for consumers, we need a replacement for the Green Homes Grant, which is far more comprehensive and recognises that solar power, battery storage and smart metering must be part of the solution. What are the plans for the government to roll out much more ambitiously residential solar, which together with battery storage and smart metering could save the average consumer up to £900 annually on their energy bill?
The honourable lady will appreciate that we have done actually quite a lot in terms of driving solar, and I referred only to the fact that we've restarted the Pot 1 auction. Pot 1 auction was all about onshore wind, but also on solar, and there are lots of projects. When we announce the actual result, there'll be lots of solar projects that will be increasing hugely solar capacity in this country.
Boma Folami.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State knows that I'm a strong supporter of his policy to end reliance on Russian oil and of the need to intensify our investment in renewable energy. There are many rural communities and constituencies like my own, and I suspect across the country, that rely on heating oil. What plans does the Secretary of State feel that his oil task force will do around securing the availability of heating oil, securing the price of heating oil that it doesn't rise out of ordinary people's reach, and also intensifying home efficiency, energy efficiency for homes, particularly for older buildings that you find in many rural communities in areas like my own?
The task force, it will do exactly as he has asked for. It will look at where we can source supply at the cheapest rate and increase our independence. It'll take away from our reliance on Russia, and it will actually source oil at the cheapest rate. There is an issue in terms of heating oil in relation to further interventions, and we're in discussions with Treasury, as well as others across the government, all the time in relation to seeing how we can improve or rather lessen the burden on our people.
Grant Davis.
The Secretary of State will know that his department refused support for the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon, but nevertheless it is going ahead as the new Blue Eden Lagoon project. So instead of looking again at fracking, which generates 5% fugitive emissions, which makes it worse than coal for climate change, will you look at supporting the Welsh Government and Wales overall in marine technologies and renewable technologies, alongside looking at organic batteries at scale, which can actually store these renewables without causing pollution?
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a very fair point. We've done a huge amount as a government in terms of driving renewables. I was very pleased to see the tidal stream auction has been ring-fenced. The specific details of the Swansea project, the Swansea Lagoon project, I felt as Energy Minister at the time, and the Secretary of State as well, felt that it wasn't economic, that specific project. But generally, I don't think any government has done more for marine renewables and marine energy.
Mark Jenkinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's swift and decisive action on phasing out Russian imports. Just to echo the comments of my honourable friend, the member for Ashfield, as our minds are now focused on increased domestic production such as that from the North Sea, does he agree with me that the benefits of domestic supply chain resilience and security should also encompass other critical minerals such as coke and coal, for which we look to Russia for over 750,000 tonnes, 50% of our requirement last year?
So he will appreciate, in terms of coke and coal supply, there is a diversity of sources. We're not just looking to Russia. But in terms of critical minerals, he makes an excellent point. He will also appreciate that this is the first government, the first time ever, that we're going to have a critical mineral strategy that will be published in the next few weeks. And my honourable friend, the member for North Derbyshire, is really leading that within the department.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Electricity from gas power stations is one of the ways that we meet peak electricity demand. Now, the Secretary of State knows that dispatchable energy can also be created from pumped storage hydro, which is a completely renewable source. So, to minimise our reliance on gas and switch to renewables, he knows that SSE is ready to go and build Corrie Glass in the Highlands. So, will he commit to agreeing a minimum floor price with SSE so that they can go on and build it and confirm timescales for that agreement?
I'm really delighted that the honourable member raises this. I think he's raised it at every questions for the last 18 months. And I'll keep saying what I've said before. We are interested in the technology. I need to look at the specific proposals that he's suggesting. And obviously, we need to work out whether it's value for money. Those are the parameters that we always look to.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday at the Bay Select Committee, we had a panel of experts talking about this very issue. And when the issue of fracking was raised, they were unanimous in their voice. It was neither be effective, cost efficient, wouldn't do anything to the price, and actually was a bit of a red herring. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that fracking is that red herring, and instead we should focus energy on more renewables and even more North Sea, because fracking just doesn't work in this country?
True. I think we could look at a range of technologies. We looked at the fracking issue. I was Energy Minister at the time. There were issues regarding the seismicity of various projects, but we've always had an open mind. We've always said, and I repeat, that we will support shale gas exploration if it can be done in a safe and sustainable way, and we will be led by the science on whether this is indeed possible. So there are lots of experiments, there are lots of empirical evidence that we need to consider.
Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch, Madam Deputy Speaker. He mentioned in his statement the need to protect the Ukrainian people from further misery. As he knows, Ukraine is a country with historic debt problems, and the full-scale Russian invasion we're witnessing will inevitably make matters worse for them. Considering this is likely to be a prolonged crisis, can he assure the House that the British government will be leading international efforts with the IMF, the World Bank and the G7 to offer Ukraine debt relief?
I think the issues regarding Ukrainian debt relief are for a much wider set of participants than are reflected in this House. We will do everything we can to support the Ukrainian people, and we are looking at every possible intervention that can, in some way, lessen the burden of this ferocious assault.
Richard Holden.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. I think the sanctions today are an excellent next step in what we're doing to really clamp down on Russia's ability to fund its war machine. But my constituents have two questions. First of all is, how can they best support the government's actions with direct contributions themselves? And secondly, they also want to know, in their own interest as well, what the UK is going to do in terms of boosting our domestic oil, gas, coking coal supply to ensure that jobs are created here in the UK, but also that we reduce our dependence on other international players at this point.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The issue of critical minerals, the issue of security of supply could not be more important. That's why I've commissioned a critical minerals strategy. In terms of help that his constituents have offered and are very fulsome in their support. There are lots and lots of ways in which we can contribute financially and in terms of material. I organised or helped organise such an effort in my constituency only last week. My excellent party chairman, Mike Brennan, led that. But there are lots of ways we can help. And in terms of security of supply, absolutely, that's, as the Prime Minister has said, is really our most important consideration right now.
Margaret Farrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The impact of banning Russian oil will come at a cost every day for people across the UK, and it's a price I'm sure they accept the necessity of due to this war by Putin on Ukraine. However, with an already growing cost of living crisis and soaring energy bills, what discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Chancellor about financially supporting green, clean and low-cost energy provision so it can be accessed faster and more broadly?
My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and I have, and our departments speak all the time about these issues. She will appreciate there's a spring statement. There was an extensive £9 billion worth of measures that my right honourable friend announced at the beginning of February. And we will be looking across the year to see how this market develops. But fiscal interventions, as she will appreciate, are a matter for my right honourable friend.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today. It can't be right that we're bankrolling the Russian state and war machine through buying Russian oil and gas, and I'm glad that we're moving to fix this at pace. Now, he will know that we import quite a lot of aviation fuel from Russia, and his department's done fantastic work in developing sustainable aviation fuel and manufacturing in the UK. Will he use this as an opportunity to drive forward that even at greater pace to set up SAF in the UK?
My honourable friend raises a really important point. I mean, in this dismal prospect in terms of the ferocious aggression, the violence that we're seeing, one of the things that we are thinking about is a more sustainable future. And actually, one of the very thin silver lining on a very dark cloud is the fact that we are talking about resilience, we are talking about sustainability, and I'm absolutely delighted to be working with my honourable friend and right honourable friends in the Department for Transport to make sure that we can accelerate the adoption of sustainable aviation fuel.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pace by which we divest from Putin's fossil fuels is important for stopping this war. And as a result of that, in wars past, we've upscaled our manufacturing in order to see the retrofit and also the renewable industry, which could really be not only the saviour of the Ukrainian people, but also the saviour of our planet. So would he not scale up, but also lead an alliance of countries which need to make that urgent diversification in order to ensure that we bring this pain on Putin's regime as quickly as possible?
The honourable lady is absolutely right, and we've got to work internationally across countries and come up with an alliance that can confront Putin in this way. And that's why we're having a G7 energy ministers meeting tomorrow, an extraordinary meeting of the energy ministers. However, I should say that it is relatively easier for us and American colleagues to be able to shut ourselves off this dependency than from colleagues in Europe who are far more dependent on Russian gas and hydrocarbons.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement on a ban on Russian oil imports. Would he agree with me that the increasing need for self-reliance of energy sources means that it's right that we invest in renewable energy schemes in this country, but also particularly including the possibility of a large tidal range facility in North Wales.
I hear the clamours for the tidal range facility in the Vale of Clwyd. I'm very, very sympathetic towards it. And my honourable friend will be good enough, I'm sure, to acknowledge that for the first time ever in this fourth auction round, we do have a tidal stream auction pot. And we are absolutely committed to doing all we can to further the development of marine renewable energy.
And finally, Deirdre Brock.
Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State said that he was 100% behind renewables at the dispatch box then, and he has mentioned the tidal stream pot, but I would like to see him offer so much more support for tidal energy schemes, which Scotland can play such an important role in, and is such a cleaner, greener and cheaper alternative to nuclear.
I recognise, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I recognise the Honourable Lady's commitment to tidal stream. She'll be good enough to notice that this was the first time that any British government has ever committed to supporting any marine energy renewable project. There's always the clamour for more. We should do more. We could do things more quickly. And I'm very happy to work with her and other people across the House to see how best we can do that.
Thank you. I thank the Secretary of State for his. I thank the Secretary of State for his thorough answers to a great many questions on this important subject. Point of order, Mr. Seeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sorry, I came in a little bit earlier than I should have done. Thank you. I've got 2 points of order, and it may be that she is good enough to hear one or both of them. On the first point of order is pertaining to how we treat members of the House of Lords. And I ask this in genuine good faith. There are members of the peerage, members of the House of Lords, who may have engaged in ethically questionable practices in relation to work, lobbying or otherwise, for the Russian state, its proxies, formal and informal. We are not, maybe for good reason, maybe not, we are not allowed to name those members of Lords during the debate, for example on lawfare or lobbying or enabling, and to do so requires some kind of special motion. In addition, Lords can take leave of absence, which can be open-ended. They are allowed to use the chamber, not the chamber, they're allowed to use the Lords' facilities and even stationary. They cannot vote, but they then do not have to register their outside interests. This strikes me as being contrary to natural justice, to democratic transparency, because we cannot name important players that may be influencing politics, that may be working for Russian proxies, formal or informally, and I would like a ruling from the chair as to what we can do to enable their participation in a potentially very important part of our national debate.
Well, the honourable gentleman asks, raises a point which actually, for a change, is a point of order, and I can give him an answer from the chair. If indeed the situation were, as the honourable gentleman describes, that it is not possible to question the conduct of a member of the House of Lords in this place, then that would indeed be contrary to our usual democratic practices. I'd be grateful if the honourable gentleman sitting next to him would just perhaps listen. It would, if that were the case, be contrary to our normal democratic practices. But that is not the case. The honourable gentleman has been slightly misinformed. It is improper and contrary to our rules to raise in a general debate or in a question and without notice the conduct of a person, either of this House or of the other place. But it is perfectly proper for the honourable gentleman to put down a motion before the House so that the House and the person in question has notice of the honourable gentleman or any member's intention to raise these matters and of the matters to be raised, and that motion would then come before the House. Now, I give the honourable gentleman an example. An early day motion is a motion before this House, and so if the honourable gentleman were to submit an early day motion, it would be a motion before this House, and he could then raise questions upon it. There are other ways of putting down a substantive motion. For example, he could go to the Backbench Business Committee and ask for time in the chamber to debate the conduct of a member of the House of Lords if it were on a motion before the House. And I very much regret that people now don't understand these. I don't blame the honourable gentleman, who is assiduous in his duties, but that many members don't understand what the procedures of this House are, and they don't understand what an EDM is. They think it's something to be brought forward by a pressure group and get hundreds of signatures, as if that made any difference. The fact is that an early day motion is a way of putting a motion before this House and thus giving notice to anyone affected by it and anyone interested in it to the fact that it's a motion before the House. The honourable gentleman can, of course, get further advice on this from the table office, and I'm sure that the clerks would be happy to help him draft any motion. I'll take his further point of order if he wishes.
I'm so grateful for that. Can I just check? My worry with the backbench thing is it can take a month or two to get, although there can be, maybe you can one can persuade them of a greater need. But the early day motion is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I've never used early day motions, simply because I think they're sort of PR vehicles. But an early day motion doesn't result in a debate in the House. And what we need is a debate in the House on these matters, in part because it's covered by privilege and the importance of, frankly, using that in the public interest.
Well, for example, again, this practice has fallen into desuetude, and it's most unfortunate that members who haven't been in the House for a long time, since the days when things were done properly.
When was that? Name a day.
Don't realise that one of the ways in which matters used to be raised before this House is that a member would put down an early day motion, and when the Leader of the House answered the business question once a week, a member would come into the chamber here and say, is the Leader of the House aware of early day motion number 236 in my name and that of 50 other members, and will he provide time for a debate on this issue because it's extremely important for the following reason? And that way, the matter would be properly raised on the floor of the House. It's possible for the honourable gentleman to do that, and the table office will give him advice. If it turns out that he has to wait 2 months, come and see me and we'll work out another way of doing it, because it's absolutely essential that matters of urgency and importance and topical importance can be raised on the floor of this House, and it's only because people don't have the proper advice on procedure that it's not being done properly. It's not because any standing order or any rule of this House prohibits proper debate. Thank you. Oh, point of order, Mr. Pritchard.
Can I apologise for dashing into chamber? I was chairing some delegated legislation. On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, this morning families awaiting the Ockenden Independent Maternity Review into baby deaths in Shropshire, which was expected to be published on the 22nd of March, were informed that due to a number of unspecified, quote, parliamentary processes, end quote, the review would now be delayed. As you can imagine, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is causing my constituents significant concern and added anxiety. What advice can you give me about ensuring this important review is published as quickly as possible?
Thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order, and I think he gave notice, but not long ago, of his intention to raise it, and therefore I have not had the opportunity to inquire and can't answer his question about what the parliamentary processes are to which he refers. But I can well understand his concern and the concerns of his constituents that this extremely important matter should not be delayed longer than is necessary. I would suggest that perhaps he ought to speak with the clerk of the journals, who could advise him about the parliamentary processes and, if necessary, how they can be speeded up. We all appreciate that it's important that this matter should come as soon as possible before the House. Thank you.
You would like to make, if the Honourable...
No, another point of order, Mr. Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed. Since the debate on lawfare and some of the debates on Ukraine last week, a number of lawyers have written what I consider to be intimidatory letters to national newspapers, including the Daily Mail. One firm specifically has implied, it's Harbottle and Lewis, if I understand correctly their letter, has implied that reporting of debates in Parliament can be, quotes, unlawful and seriously defamatory. They are relating to statements made by me in the House, but also made by the good Lord Rooker, if I'm allowed to name his excellent work. And they have said to the Mail that reporting our words outside the House can be unlawful and seriously defamatory. Would Madam Deputy Speaker like to say anything about this? Because it seems to be that not only are we dealing with a very aggressive culture in the law, but not only trying to intimidate members of the Free Press, they're now trying to intimidate members of Parliament.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order, which again is a point of order, so I have no objection to him raising two proper points of order within a few minutes of one another. It's all the spurious points of order to which we object. I recall very well the debate on lawfare to which he refers, and indeed the Right Honourable gentleman who brought the debate has miraculously appeared at the bar of the House, just as this matter is quite properly raised. My recollection is that it was an important and powerful debate, and that there were very few people here to hear it and pay attention to it. And it has since become all the more urgent and topical, and the honourable gentleman is right to raise it as a point of order. I think that in technical terms, the point of order that he raises is a matter of interpretation of parliamentary privilege, of when it applies, how it applies, and who applies it, which is more complicated than I'm able to answer immediately in a point of order. I would once again refer him to the clerk of the journals, and if he and the Right Honourable gentleman wish to discuss this matter further, I'm quite sure that my office and Mr. Speaker's office would be happy to discuss it with him. And it is actually quite refreshing to have 2 points of order that are points of order, and I thank the honourable gentleman for those. We now move on to the 10-minute rule motion. James Daly.
Here. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to make provision regarding pets with microchips and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, the reason I am stood here is because of Gizmo and Tuck. Gizmo was a cat and a much beloved family pet. Gizmo died when she was 15 in a car accident on the 17th of July 2016, and in the words of her owner Helena, was disposed of like a piece of trash. Tuck was a healthy 16-month-old rescue dog who was euthanised on the 22nd of December 2017. Tuck was not scanned prior to euthanasia and was presented by an individual who was not his keeper. My bill, Pet Microchips Bill, would introduce statutory requirements upon local authorities and veterinary surgeons to address the failings highlighted in the stories of Gizmo, Tuck, and many, many much-loved pets, too numerous to mention today. Part 1 of the bill would introduce a legal requirement for veterinarians to scan for microchips before euthanizing pets. I am delighted that the RCV, CJ, last year updated its code of professional conduct to require that before euthanising an otherwise healthy dog, veterinary surgeons must first scan the animal for the presence of a rescue backup. While this is a most welcome development, I believe this duty must be put on a statutory footing rather than at the discretion of the veterinarian. Part 1, bracket 2, would require the veterinarian to scan the pet upon first presentation and contact the registered owner or rescue backup. It is crucial to highlight the importance of rescue backup. Rescue organisations and breeders register their details on the original database as a secondary contact as part of the adoption contract or bill of sale. In times of vulnerability, the secondary contact is there to prevent the animal from being unnecessarily euthanised and alert the veterinarian that an alternative is in place. This also allows the rescue or breeder to remain a constant presence and provide support to the pet should it be abandoned or sold without the rescue organisation or breeder's knowledge. If the adopter or owner does not keep the information registered on the microchip up to date, the secondary rescue backup information will enable the rescuer or breeder to be contacted in all circumstances. As I have said, despite the change in the RCVS code, the scanning of microchips prior to euthanasia remains at the discretion of the veterinarian and is not a legal requirement. Animals can still be subject to destruction on the basis of behavioural injuries or accusations of ill behaviour, and I do not believe this to be right. The rescue backup provision allows time for comprehensive assessments, healthcare checks, reforming support, and guarantees that any life-ending decision is based on the animal's best interests, with all facts and alternate options examined. The Tuxcourt Law campaign was started 4 years ago by the brilliant Sue Williams and Dawn Ashley, and has had the fantastic support of Dominic Dyer. Over 100,000 people from all over the country supported this campaign, leading to a parliamentary debate on the 28th of June last year. Part 2 of the bill would place requirements upon local authorities to make all reasonable efforts to take steps listed in subsection 2 with regard to deceased cats found on a public highway or otherwise reported to local authority. These steps would include making arrangements to pick the cat up, ensuring it is microchipped, finding ownership details, contacting the owner to inform them of what has happened, making arrangements for the owner to contact to be reunited with the cat, and ensuring that the cat will be held and preserved by the local authority for up to 7 days. There would also be a requirement to record certain information and also a register. In accordance with Section 3, this would be a register of cats and cat owner reunification organisations. My constituent Helena Abrahams has been campaigning for 6 years for Gizmo's Law, which is encompassed within my bill, to ensure that no other pet owner has to go through the experience she suffered with Gizmo. Through the efforts of Helena, Wendy and the whole team at Gizmo's Legacy, not only have they secured the support of tens of thousands of people throughout the country for the proposed change in the law, but every day they work to ensure that cats who have sadly deceased are returned to their owners. These are much-loved family pets. Gizmo's Law is articulated in Part 2 of the bill and is a testament to the kindness and humanity shown every day by Helena and her team. It will also be the benefit, hopefully, of this bill that Helena, through her hard work, working in partnership with a pet food company, they have agreed to supply any local authority that does not have a scanner with the appropriate equipment, and clearly that is something to be recommended. I hope this is a sensible step. Steps have been taken already. The Minister is a genuinely excellent Minister, and the Department have been interacting with me in respect of this. I've been stood here for 2 years speaking about this, so I must apologise again to the House for that. But these people, Sue, Dawn, Helena, Wendy, are genuinely good people who are trying to do things for the right reasons. And that's the end of that.
The honourable gentleman certainly held the attention of the House there. And he most remarkably came in at well under 10 minutes, so he'd probably get in the Guinness Book of Records for that. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
I do apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Jim Shannon MP, James Grundy MP, Luke Pollard MP, Tom Tugendhat MP, Mark Logan MP, Lee Anderson MP, Aaron Bell MP, Chris Green MP, Craig Tracy MP, Robin Miller MP, Sally Ann Hart MP, and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Hear, hear.
James Healey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pets microchips bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 18th of March.
Friday the 18th of March. Thank you. We now come to the proceedings on the estimates day. We will start with the motion on the supplementary estimate for the Department for Education and the debate on the spending of the Department for Education on the National Tutoring Programme and Adult Education. The debate will be led by Robert Halfon. First, I will ask the Minister to move the motion formally. Just say I beg to move.
Beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper. Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate, but particularly thank my honourable friends and members of the Select Committee, first the member for Liverpool Riverside for co-sponsoring this important debate, but particularly the member for Penistone and Stockbridge, who is a brilliant member of the Education Select Committee, and I appreciate all the work that she does. Just to reassure the whip on the front bench, I'm fully supportive of the estimates today, and I'm sure I reassure the Minister as well on that. What I'm trying to do in this speech is to recommend things that I think could be improved, and also to argue actually that whilst extra money has been raised, what we need to do is ensure we have value for money, and that money is spent well, and I hope the government sees my remarks in that way, in that spirit. Now, in last year's autumn budget, the Chancellor and the Education Secretary set out a vision of support for schools, skills and families. And of course I agree with that. I think it is very important to focus on those three things, but I also think that something needs to be added, which is social justice. I believe in the fundamental challenges facing education right now. Of course, there are these important things: recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing social injustices, and early years intervention. And I see the my right honourable friend, the member for South Northamptonshire, and know she is an expert on this in Parliament, and does so much to ensure that the government focuses on early intervention. I should also say that it's important as I open this debate to thank the teachers and support staff in schools and colleges in my constituency of Harlow, who do so much to keep pupils learning, who have worked incredibly hard during the pandemic, and also, of course, teaching support staff around the country. On skills and standards, clearly the government are making progress. So literacy rates are up. We've got 1.9 million children now in good or outstanding schools. The skills bill, lifetime skill guarantee, which passed through the House of Commons only a couple of weeks ago, I think could be very exciting alongside proper money, 3 billion of extra funding, and that should be welcome. That's real money. As the Education Secretary knows, and the ministers know, I think that more needs to be done to increase the amount of careers encounters that young people have at school. From the government is suggesting just 3 to 1 a year in key years. I'm suggesting there should be 9 encounters altogether. And actually that doesn't cost the government any extra funding. I've also suggested that additional funding be made available to support adults to obtain a level 2 qualification as long as they can demonstrate their intention to progress to level 3 as per the lifelong learning entitlements. As I said in the skills bill debate on the amendments, there are many adults who are not yet ready to do a level 3. I want them to do a level 3. It's a wonderful thing that the government are going to offer level 3 in the core subjects, but if they're not ready, it makes sense to get them at least to start, give them the opportunity to start on a level 2 and then use that for progression as long as they progress to a level 3 after that. And I recognise funds are difficult. I recognise that they're not readily available, but if you're going to bid for if a bid for things in the autumn statement, that should be in the next spending round. That should be, I think, a significant priority for the government. And going back to the Baker, the careers encounters, what's known as the Baker clause, that the Secretary of State has indicated to me that the government want to do more on this. The Skills Minister has said the same. I know it is in the Lords at the moment being discussed and no doubt is being brought up by Lord Baker and many other peers. We have to, if we are really serious about transforming adult education, about building an apprenticeship and skills nation, we have to get more skills organisations, further education colleges, university technical schools, apprenticeships, organisations, apprentices into schools to encourage and set out the incredible career paths that there are, so that pupils know that it isn't just an option of university, but there is also an option to do skills and apprenticeships as well. And as I also said in the debate, it grieves me, in the previous debate on this subject, that when I go around the country and I meet apprentices, it's one of the most enjoyable parts of my job to meet apprentices in all walks of life, and 8 to 9 times out of 10 they tell me that they've never been encouraged